Chapter 122. It's not appropriate to use the word old friend. Zhong Dajuan stared at the back of the figure in the rain-proof corridor and said angrily, "Who knows how Her Highness met him and was deceived by him?" In front of the study room, the burly Chu Zhongtian scratched his head and said, "I mentioned to my elders that Her Highness knew Ning Ke after I returned home. My fifth uncle later wrote back that he had asked Hua Shangyue, the senior military officer of Gushan Commandery. He said that Ning Ke was a soldier of the city of Wei. His Highness had accompanied His Highness on the way back to the capital. His Highness remembered this, so he occasionally took care of him in Chang'an. Chu Zhongtian was the best among the 37 grandsons of great General Chu Xiongtu of the Tang Empire's 16 guards. He was doted on in the residence, and the elders would not avoid him when discussing the court affairs. Therefore, his words were always credible. It seems that it was just a coincidence that day in front of the old library. As for helping Her Highness on her way back to the capital, Zhong Dajuan sneered lightly and said, "What can he do as a little soldier? By the way, helping to set up tents, leading horses and collecting dung can also be counted as helping. Her Highness is virtuous and kind, so it's not strange that she occasionally takes care of him. But I really didn't expect that this villain dared to use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status. He is really despicable." Hearing this, Situilan, who had been sitting silently beside the table, suddenly stood up and looked at Zhong Dajuan. She said, "When did Ning Ke use Her Highness's prestige to raise his status? I know better than you what Ning Ke did on her way back from the city of Wei. If it was just to collect dung, do you think Her Highness would come to see him in person that day?" She raised her eyebrows and said in a low voice, "You said Ning Ke is a villain and despicable. Then I don't know what you mean by talking about others behind their back. If you really think he is so unbearable, you can point it out to him. But as he said before he left, you dare not because you are still afraid of him." Zhong Dejun's face darkened. He did not expect that this noble lady of Chang'an would still speak for Ning Ke when he had offended most of his classmates. He suppressed his anger and explained, "I'm not afraid of him. But we are all refined people. Do we have to roll up our sleeves and fight with that young barbarian?" Situilan did not want to talk with this so-called gifted scholar. She looked back at her companion who was whispering to Xie Qingyun, frowned slightly and asked angrily, "Wucai, are you coming back?" Jean Wucai secretly glanced at Xie Qingyun's face, and then looked at Situilan with a smile, saying, "You go back first, I'll go to the old library to read for a while." Situilan knew that the so-called reading in the old library was just an excuse, so she didn't bother to pay attention to it. She packed up her things and walked to Xie Qingyun. Looking at the famous talent of the South Jin Kingdom, she said, "Wucai is the favorite granddaughter of the libationer of the Tang Empire. Although you are famous in the South Jin Kingdom, please go to the second floor first." Xie Qingyun instantly understood what she meant. He smiled slightly and said confidently, "I'll try my best." Zhong Dejun was dissatisfied with Situilan's previous words for Ning Quebec. He said sarcastically, "If Mr. Xie can't enter the second floor, I think no student of the academy can enter this year. Or do you think Ning Ke can enter?" Situilan frowned and glanced at him, and then turned away angrily. In front of all the classmates in the dormitory, she couldn't promise that Ning Ke could enter the second floor. Not to mention that she did not believe it, she believed that Ning Ke dared not have such an extravagant hope. In the kitchen, Ning Ke ate 3 pieces of fried steamed buns with a bowl of golden millet porridge. He passed through the wetland at the fastest speed, walked into the quiet old library, and entered the second floor. This second floor was different from the previous second floor. But for him, this floor full of books and the faint fragrance of old ink was also of great significance. It was unknown whether it was the faint scent of books that calmed one's mind easily, or the tightly closed west window blocked the blazing sunlight, making the building cool and pleasant. Walking into the second floor, Ning Kei's previous grievances and grievances in the study room, like the summer sweat on his body, were instantly swept away. Walking to the east window, Ning Kei looked at the slender, gentle and tranquil female professor, and bowed respectfully as usual. After straightening up, he looked at the beautiful side face of the female professor, whose age could not be guessed. Thinking of the day before yesterday, when he was seriously injured and about to die, he had a strong confusion in his heart. He wanted to open his mouth to ask her a few questions, but in the end, he did not dare to act rashly. The female professor seemed to have forgotten what she saw the day before yesterday, and that the lad beside her had been leaning against the wall in the building, waiting for death. She gently nodded her chin as usual, without looking at Ning Kei or saying anything. She quietly read the hairpin-style small regular script on the paper. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to notice the slight movement of her chin. Ning Kei laughed at himself, scratched his head, and stopped thinking about those things. He walked back to the bookshelf, squatted down, took out the book Wu Zhanyang's Theory on Howren's Sword, sat on the floor by the west window, and read it attentively with the dim light coming through the window paper. In the past, the acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow were blocked, so he could not remember the cultivation scripts in the building. In the beginning, he even fainted when he saw the numbers. Later, when he learned to use the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to break the characters, he could slightly understand the profound meaning of the handwriting in the book. However, those strokes still made him extremely distressed. For example, the strokes in the handwriting of the Howren's Sword book were like sharp sword radiance, piercing directly into his liver and intestines, making him extremely painful. Now, although he still could not clearly know how many acupoints in his ocean of Qi and mountain of snow had been opened, he could feel the breath of heaven and earth in the world, which was like a calm ocean, which was enough to prove that the 4 words blocked without pain had been mercifully taken away from him by Haotian. Therefore, he very much wanted to know what would be different when he read these books now. It was indeed different. The meaning hidden in the ink on the book entered his mind through his eyes and then gradually spread into his body. When it turned into sword rays that began to circulate around his body, he no longer felt the unbearable pain in his chest. Instead, it turned into a somewhat gloomy feeling. Blocked, very blocked, very blocked. This feeling was very bad, and it easily reminded him of Ma Yinglong's medicine. Therefore, after reading attentively for more than an hour, he shook his head and put down the book. He walked to the west window and began to leave a message for Chin Pippi. First, I've opened it. You can congratulate me. Second, why do these books still seem to be useless? Third, do you have any simple and feasible methods to teach me? Finally, thank you. With a very slight regret, Ning Kei went downstairs in the twilight and took a horse carriage back to Lin 47th Street in Chang'an City. Then, he began to look forward to tomorrow's academy life, because he wanted to know what Chin Pippi's message would be. He did not know that his regret was actually an emotion that deserved a beating. If the West Hill Haotian Divine Palace or some other Vedanta of the Buddhism sect knew that a young man who had just entered the initial awareness state hoped to officially start cultivating within a day, they would definitely expel this young man for being greedy or greedy. If the instructors of the academy knew that one of their students had really become a peerless cultivation genius after opening 10 of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow and couldn't wait to learn the academy's unique skill, Howren's Sword, they would definitely praise him for being so narcissistic, and then make him stretch out his hand and slap his palm 100 times. The vermilion bird portrait carved by the sage of the previous generation on Chang'an Avenue, the mysterious big black umbrella behind him, and the heavenly power pill from a certain place in the West Hill were all the most precious and magical things in the world. But if it was only one of them, it was still not enough to make such a change in his body. There had always been a saying in the cultivation world that cultivation was just a chosen human being who was lucky to pick up the gift given by Haotian. If an ordinary person who was born unable to cultivate could cultivate, that was to go against the heaven and change his fate. The ability to go against the heaven and change his fate could only be a miracle. According to the classics or oral tradition, only the West Hill Divine Palace and the Hautian Divine Palace had this ability, and it required those great divine priests with a high state to pay a great price. Therefore, the ordinary cultivator beside Min Mountain, the talisman master in charge of the assessment of the military ministry, the old man Liu Qinchen on the journey, and Chen Pippi who left the letter could simply conclude that Ning Ke could not cultivate without any hesitation. However, when the three most magical things in the world, the vermilion bird, the black umbrella, and the heavenly power pill, had sex with Ning Ke at the same time, the world's slowly rotating fate slightly trembled. This sentence can be ignored. In that dark morning, the cultivator Yen Suqing first broke the bone and flesh defense on his chest with his lifetime cultivation, and then the top wing of the vermilion bird turned into an invisible spear and pierced through his ocean of qi and mountain of snow through this wound. Then the vermilion bird burned everything it touched with invisible fire. At this time, Ning Ke should have died. The big black umbrella played a key role at this time, protecting his last vitality like the shade of a willow that covered the sun, and reshaping the mountain of snow in his body with the inexhaustible power of the night sky. But this was not enough, because the reshaped microworld in his body was so fragile and unstable that it could collapse at any time. At this time, Chen Pippi offered a heavenly power pill like a virgin offering her chastity. Heaven rewarded the diligent. Maybe it was because he had been too hard and tired in the past 10 years, so Haotian began to make it up to him. Ning Ke did not know that he had encountered the most magical luck in the world. Even if he knew, he could not understand the truth. He was still dissatisfied and regretful that his fate was changed against the heaven, and this kind of dissatisfaction and regret really made people angry and speechless. Chen Pippi was speechless and angry. Seeing the word, congratulations, Chen Pippi guessed that the guy had been forced to change his fate against the heaven and really embarked on the road of cultivation. He could not help but open his mouth wide and could not say a word for a long time. He strongly suspected that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He did not know about the magical battle between the vermilion bird and the big black umbrella on the long street with Ning Ke's body as the battlefield. But as a peerless cultivation genius cultivated by both the West Hill and the Academy, he could guess some reasons and consequences. But no matter how he guessed, he could not guess that Ning Ke could have such a miraculous lucky chance. The shock lasted for a long time, and he did not know what to say at all. Deep in his proud and gentle heart, a strong feeling of envy and jealousy grew, and when he saw the message on the paper, he could not suppress his anger. It was hot and dry in the summer, although there was a cool breeze in the middle of the night, and the cicadas outside the west window gradually weakened. Chen Pippi was sweating all over, either because he was too fat or because he was angry. He untied his clothes and wrote back angrily, "First of all, I don't want to congratulate you, because this is too absurd and incomprehensible. Secondly, it's not that reading is useless, but you, a cultivation idiot, is useless. Thirdly, I admit that I am very jealous of you at this time, so I don't want to guide you. Finally, please thank Haotian and your ancestors of 18 generations. As for me, thank you my ass." Ning Ke had been brainwashed by one sentence when he was very, very young, in fact, when he was very, very young. The general meaning of that sentence was, a person's knowledge is like a circle. The more things you know, the bigger the circle is, and then you will find more and more things you don't know. He used to hate this sentence, and did not understand why his mother and teachers kept educating him with this pessimistic theory. But when he finally stepped into the world of cultivation, he found that this sentence was indeed very true, so true that it made him extremely confused and helpless, because he found that there were more and more things he did not understand. After seeing Chen Pippi's message, He very seriously read the cultivation books on the second floor according to the message, but he still could not find anything after looking at them. In this life, he was used to carrying 3 knives and killing people everywhere on the grassland, which was a relatively straightforward way of thinking, which was not a bad thing. After confirming that he could not move forward for the time being, Ning Ke decided not to think about it, but to do something more important. No one could imagine what was the first thing Ning Ke did after confirming that he could cultivate. He didn't hold a wine pot and write books all day long. He didn't go to the instructors of the academy and yell, "I can do it! I can do it! I can do it!" He didn't go to the princess's mansion and tell Liu that he was worth investing in. Except for secretly happy in the old brush pen shop with Sang Sang, looking up from time to time like 2 fools, and then laughing inexplicably, he just showed off to Chun Pippi for a while, and then he went to the South City. Tonight, at the entrance of the famous star-picking casino in the South City, a nervous master and servant were whispering. The black-haired lad with a clear face and shallow cheeks looked up at the gold-painted signboard of the star-picking casino and swallowed a mouthful of saliva, not knowing whether it was due to nervousness or greed, and asked in a slightly hoarse voice, "Sang Sang, do you think we will be chased by the casino if we win too much later?" The slightly dark-skinned little handmaiden was also very nervous. She held a heavy box in her right hand and shrank her body behind the lad. Listening to the noise coming from the dim light, she said in a trembling voice, "Young master, I am more worried about whether your idea will work or not. Can you see the points on the dice by sensing the chi of heaven and earth? Are you sure? If I lose all the money later, don't be so anxious that you'll bet on me." "What nonsense are you talking about? Besides, even if I bet you, the casino may not accept it." Ning Ke nervously rubbed his hands and said, "As for the confidence, didn't I show it to you many times last night? I never fight a battle that I am not sure of. I will definitely win, but the key is how to run after winning." "I'm sure we can win." Sang Sang didn't seem to worry about running at all. After hearing that they could win, she gently bit her lips and made up her mind. She took out a small star made of folded paper from her old belt and said softly, "I took 200 taels of silver from under the bed and exchanged them for a banknote. There are still more than 100 taels of silver in the box. Young master, take it and win as much as you can." Well, this chapter has 4,000 taels of silver, including the 2,000 taels of silver from yesterday's chapter. But if there are still 2,000 taels of silver left, I'm not sure I will make up for it. I'm really writing like an idiot. Last night, I counted the days with my leader and found that there were still 5 days left. At that time, I wanted to open the window and jump down. But to be honest, I was able to finish it. Before writing this chapter, my body was weak and my hands were shaking. I told Zhang Xiaohua that I couldn't do it anymore. Xiaohua asked, "What's wrong?" "Maybe it's because I'm too tired." Later, I smoothly finished writing 4,000 words. Then I realized that it wasn't because I was writing too hard. It was because I ate too little last night and was so hungry. I put my palms together and scolded the leader. "Finally, I want a recommendation vote. Finally, thank you. Don't thank my sister, I don't have a sister. Good night, good morning, I'm going to walk the dog and then I'll sleep. See you at night." This paragraph is more than 4,000 words, so I have no choice but to state it out of boredom to avoid misunderstanding. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 123. The star-picking casino in Southern City was the most profitable business of Master Meng, a tycoon in Jianghu. After the bloody battle in Spring Breeze Pavilion, Master Meng's power directly collapsed and the casino was smashed into a pile of ruins. It was not until 2 months later that the casino was renovated and opened again, but now no one knew who was the boss behind the casino. Although it was a casino that rose from the ruins, it was, after all, a time-honored one in Chang'an City. Besides, it was decorated at a high price. The wooden tables in the casino were bright, the lanterns were hanging high, and the furnishings were exquisite. There was no sign of decay. Ning Ke and Sang Sang walked along the way, looking at the gauze curtain around them and hearing the deliberately suppressed exclamations in the hall in the distance. They could not help feeling a little strange. When they were in the frontier fortress, they often went to the casinos in City of Wei and Kaiping Market. However, compared with those small gambling shops full of sweaty, stinky, and swearing voices, this place was like another world. No matter how luxurious and elegant the decoration was, a casino was still a casino. After all, it was a bloody place where people put their lives on the chips to fight. People from all walks of life shuttled through it. Although Ning Ke and Sang Sang, the young master and servant, were a little conspicuous, the stewards and servants of the casino were used to seeing gamblers of all kinds, so they just glanced at them casually and did not pay special attention to them. As for the gamblers in the spacious hall of the star-picking casino, none of them noticed their arrival. Dressed in silk or linen clothes, men and women of all ages, regardless of social class, were sitting or standing around dozens of big tables covered with brown blankets. They were nervously staring at the dice cups or the black triangle chips on the tables. It was extremely hot in midsummer. On the three sides of the hall, there were 7 or 8 female servants waving the long fans in their hands to blow the wind into the hall. However, because there were too many gamblers in the hall, the air was still a little stuffy. Mixed with the smell of expensive powder and tobacco and wine, a faint and exciting smell of ambition gradually came out. If it were not for the extravagant ice basin placed under each table in the casino, the smell would probably be stronger. The casino was not a charity. The purpose of investing was to make money. The more extravagant the investment was, the more money they wanted to make. Ning Ke looked at the details in the hall and looked at the dealers in the same cyan uniforms, becoming more and more nervous. He did not know the lower limit of betting here, and did not know whether they had brought enough money. He went to the counter to exchange chips and asked about the minimum bet and the rules of the game. Feeling a little relieved, he took Sang Sang to look around the hall of the casino. When he saw someone leaving the table where the dice cup was, he squeezed in before the others without hesitation and looked directly at the table, ignoring the disgusted looks from the people behind him. Shaking the dice cup to see who was the biggest was probably the simplest and quickest way to determine the winner in the casino. What Ning Ke liked were the two characteristics of simplicity and quickness, whether it was killing people or gambling. In addition, he knew that this was the only way he could cheat, so he naturally stood there like a nail and refused to leave. The 3 dice were divided by 9 points, and the more dice were big and the less dice were small. If the dealer got 3 sixes, it would be the best. However, if the gamblers were brave or bored, they could naturally bet on the leopard. If they won, they would not only kill the gamblers at the table, but also compensate the gamblers on behalf of the banker of the casino. However, this kind of thing rarely happened in the casino. Staring at the big dice cup on the brown blanket, which was at least twice the size of an ordinary one, and the pretty female dealer waved her bare white forearm and rolled the big dice cup up and down like a magic trick, Ning Ke listened to the crisp and dense sound of the 3 dice in the dice cup, and the sound of the dice cup falling heavily on the table. Ning Ke slightly lowered his eyes and seemed to be hesitating. In fact, he had already begun to meditate. The psyche power in his brain passed through the ocean of qi and mountain of snow in his body, slowly and gently perceiving the breath of heaven and earth around him, and then perceiving everything around him through the breath of heaven and earth. This kind of perception was very wonderful. The invisible psyche power wave mobilized the breath of heaven and earth to spread out and fall on things, which would slightly deform the perception. This kind of perception was fed back to his psyche power wave through the breath of heaven and earth, and then entered his mind, forming a picture that was not clear, but he could see some details that were invisible to the naked eye. There was a fat hand on the brown table. It was the hand of the owner of a cloth shop. After the dice cup was set, he threw 50 silver taels worth of chips to Big and pressed the rest of the chips under his palm. 50 silver taels worth of chips was not a small amount, but the owner's expression did not change. Only the hand that was pressing the chips was slightly trembling. Ning Kei did not care about the gambler's psychological state. Although he often earned some money by gambling in the city of Wei, he knew that even the best gamblers could not win forever. Today, he came to the star-picking casino just to win a lot of money with those wonderful abilities, so he only needed to care about whether he could see things that others could not see. There is only the smallest chip of 2 taels of silver left, and he still behaves so calmly? Through the subtle feedback of the breath of heaven and earth, he saw the number of chips under the boss's trembling palm, and could not help laughing and muttering in his heart. The word "see" was not an accurate description. He could only vaguely feel the edges of the chips and the protrusions on them. There was no warm and smooth sensation to the touch, and there was no visual effect of seeing it with his own eyes in his mind. If a cultivator could cause such an effect by mobilizing the breath of heaven and earth, it could be imagined that there must be many cultivators in history who had nosebleeds every day, felt tired every night, and died of chi deviation because they peeped at the scenery of women's breasts every day, or fantasized about something soft and tender. The beautiful female dealer looked around gently, and opened the dice cup with both hands. The 3 dices at the bottom of the cup were 2, 3, 3 small. The cloth shop owner's palm on the table stiffened slightly. His 5 fingers grasped down, tightly holding the last chip. He forced a smile to the people around him, nodded and walked out. At this moment, Song Song's small body finally succeeded in squeezing in. She squeezed to Ning Kei's side with difficulty, stood on her tiptoes, and looked at the pile of chips and the dice cup on the table with her willowy eyes, forcibly suppressing her nervousness. A slight and clear sound of the dices hitting each other rang out again, and a new round of gambling began on the table. The big dice cup rolled up and down in the fair hands of the beautiful female dealer, and then fell on the table. "Please make your bets." The female dealer looked at the gamblers around the table with a smile, and reread the rules of star-picking casino, as she did at the beginning of every new round of gambling. If you don't make your bets within the time limit, please wait for the next round. The big and small gambling table was in the shape of a semicircle. On the wide table, several betting areas were drawn with a thin white cloth. In addition to piles of chips and a few teacups, there was a small and cute hourglass placed in the middle of the gambling table. After every round, there would be someone to turn the hourglass upside down. Ning Kei glanced at the fine sand flowing quickly in the hourglass, and found that time was a little tight, so he quickly focused his attention on the big, black and heavy dice cup. Because he looked so attentively, the expression on the lad's face was particularly focused and nervous. Some guests at the table couldn't help laughing and joked, "I don't know which family's kid came here to play star-picking. Does he think he can break the dice cup if he stared at it for a long time?" Ning Kei didn't pay attention to the jokes around him, because he was very nervous at this time. Besides, could he tell these gamblers that he was going to break the big, black and bright dice cup? Just as he said to Sang Sang at the entrance of the casino, Ning Kei never fought a battle without preparation in his life. In order to win money today, he had spent the whole night yesterday experimenting. He felt how deep the water in the bucket was through the wooden bucket, how many taels of silver under the bed through the bedboard, and whether Sang Sang squatted under the window with her eyes open or closed. After repeated training, he was sure that he could control the weak chi of heaven and earth. Although it was impossible to shake Mount Tai, it should not be a big problem to see Mount Tai. Therefore, he came to the star-picking casino with confidence. As for the whole night of meditation, his speed and proficiency in mobilizing the chi of heaven and earth had been greatly improved, which was a benefit beyond his expectation. According to the battle plan made by the master and servant in Lin 47th Street and the poor practical experience, Ning Ke thought that the subtle chi of heaven and earth controlled by his psyche power could easily pass through the thick wall of the dice cup when he looked at the black dice cup, and then feel the wonderful depression on the surface of the dice. However, he never expected that the chi of heaven and earth he controlled couldn't go any further after entering the thick wall of the dice cup. Ning Ke's body suddenly stiffened, and he looked at the big black dice cup in shock, not understanding what had happened. At this time, the bottom of the cute hourglass in the center of the gambling table was almost full of sand. An impatient gambler at the table saw his appearance and began to urge him. He looked at the black dice cup in distress, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. According to his usual behavior, he should give up this game. However, he didn't know whether it was because of the hourglass and the urging, or the strong unwillingness in his heart. He didn't want to give up. He stared at the dice cup, frowned, and desperately increased the strength of his psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth to stab into the dice cup, which was like an iron wall. Break. The chi of heaven and earth, compressed to the extreme by the psyche power, seemed to become a sharp, invisible needle, and finally stabbed into the dice cup. Feeling the wonderful touch like a hot knife cutting into butter and fingers into cream, and seeing the 3 dice lying quietly at the bottom of the dice cup, Ning Ke suddenly relaxed, and his tightly knitted eyebrows gradually relaxed. Just before the hourglass finished, he took out the small star that was folded into a silver note and gently put it on the side of the table that bet on big. The beautiful dealer glanced at him with a smile, and slowly lifted the dice cup. 4, 5, 6. Big. The small star that was folded into a silver note was carefully spread out by the female dealer with her slender fingers, and then pressed on the center of the gambling table to show to the gamblers. Then she pushed the silver one by Ning Ke to them with a thin bamboo ruler. Even in the star-picking casino, it was rare to see 200 taels of silver being used to bet on big or small in the dice cup. In addition to the gambler's compensation, the dealer also had to pay a lot of money. The chips pushed by the thin bamboo ruler to Ning Ke were not divided into big or small. They were stacked up one after another, which looked quite attractive. A middle-aged man at the gambling table looked at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "You seem to be young, but you play big. You don't look proud even though you have won. You are really calm at such a young age." Ning Ke lifted his sleeves to wipe the sweat on his forehead, and shook his head with a smile without saying anything. He thought to himself, "If you can see through the dice cup like me, you can naturally be as carefree as if you have seen through the mortal world in the gambling house." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 124. Those who had seen through the world of mortals, rather than those who pretended to see through the world of mortals and wanted to take the shortcut to Zhongnan, were basically hiding in the remote mountains and forests, or waiting for death in the remote and dilapidated temples. It was impossible for them to come to the busiest casino in Chang, and for money and stare at the dice cup as if they were the enemy who killed their father. Ning Ke obviously did not think too deeply when he thought of that sentence. In fact, the situation on the gambling table did not give him time to think or reflect. With the sound of shaking the dice, the heavy black dice cup kept falling and being picked up. The chips on the gambling table in front of him were getting more and more. On the way, the female dealer changed several big chips for him, but she still could not stop the chips from piling up higher and higher, gradually becoming a hill. Playing the dice cup to see who was bigger or smaller, he won 7 rounds in a row. He gave his all in each round, and by the 7th round, he had already bet more than 1,000 taels of silver. Even in a place like the Ingo Casino, which was used to seeing bloodshed, it was still rare to see such a magnificent scene with extreme luck as the foundation. There were more and more people around the brown gambling table, but fewer and fewer people around Ning Ke and Sang Sang. The gamblers could hardly suppress the fanaticism in their eyes, but they did not want to be too close to the lad in case of displeasing the casino. The female dealer was still beautiful and gentle, but the smile on her face had become extremely reluctant. She apologized to the gamblers and left, saying that she was tired. The casino sent a middle-aged dealer to replace her. The gamblers around the gambling table knew that the casino felt that the lad's luck or gambling skills were a little difficult to deal with, so they replaced the dealer. Some regular customers even recognized that the middle-aged dealer was the master of the Ingo Casino, and exclaimed in surprise. No gamblers dared to bet with Ning Ke for a long time. From the fourth round, many gamblers followed Ning Ke to bet with different attitudes and won a lot of money. However, when they saw the middle-aged croupier and heard the discussions of the surrounding gamblers, most of them decided not to follow Ning Ke for the time being and decided to wait and see. Ning Ke had accumulated a lot of experience in the frontier fortress over these years, and he could be called the first master of gambling in the city of Wei. However, it was still impossible for him to compete with the real powerful dealers in Chang'an. But now, he did not rely on gambling skills to win the game, but on the skills of a cultivator, using the primal energies of heaven and earth to cheat. Then, as long as he did not cheat in the casino, no matter how skilled a gambling master was, how could he be his opponent? Was cheating allowed in the casino? Of course they could. But the Ingo Casino was one of the top 3 well-known places in the register of the Chang'an local government. After all, it was not a small gambling house in a brothel. They would not resort to such means unless they had to. So, they could only watch Ning Ke win. After the middle-aged dealer entered the arena, Ning Ke won 3 consecutive rounds. The crowd of gamblers behind him could not hold it in any longer. They took out their chips and started to follow the trend again. As a result, the casino lost more and more money at a faster rate. However, the middle-aged dealer's slightly dark face was still calm. It was hard to tell if it had become darker. The crisp sound of the dice hitting the walls of the dice cup gradually disappeared. He slowly removed his hand from the dice cup and glanced at the hourglass that had just been turned over. Without looking at the other guests at the table, he looked directly at Ning Ke and said with a smile, "Guest, please leave your hand after you place your bet." Ning Ke held the thin bamboo ruler in his hand and slowly frowned. After a long silence, he stood up from the chair and put the bamboo ruler in the closest and smallest area to the middle-aged dealer. The chips in front of him had piled up into a small mountain. It would be very difficult to push the chips into the big and small areas in each round. So, after a discussion with the casino, they agreed that if he wanted to bet all his chips, he could use the bamboo ruler in his hand instead. At this time, he bet the bamboo ruler, which meant that he was betting all of his assets on it. The crowd around the gambling table suddenly exclaimed. These gamblers in Chang'an, who paid great attention to their manners, could no longer suppress the shock in their hearts, and became no different from the military gamblers in the city of Wei who made a fuss. Leopard! Leopard! Why did he bet the leopard? Lower your voice. Did he win too much just now and was worried that something would go wrong? So, he deliberately lost some. What nonsense is that? Even if he deliberately wanted to lose, it didn't make sense for him to bet all his chips on the table. With the exclamations, the gamblers began to discuss in shock. However, the middle-aged dealer behind the table was not affected by these discussions. He calmly looked at Ning Ke, who slightly lowered his head and said in a gentle voice, "Guest, are you sure?" Ning Ke looked at the hill-like chips in front of him and was a little absent-minded. After being reminded by Sang Sang, he reacted and nodded. Of course, he could win more by betting on the leopard, but the probability was too small. Even the most daring gamblers dared not bet with Ningquebet. Under the gaze of the crowd, the middle-aged dealer put his palm on the dice cup but did not open it for a long time, as if the dice cup was as heavy as a mountain. Suddenly, He raised his head and looked at Ning Kei with a slight smile, saying, "Let's make friends." Ning Kei didn't mean to urge him to open the dice cup. After hearing this, he understood the meaning of the casino. He smiled and nodded to express his gratitude. Then, he turned around and whispered to Sang Sang before leaving the table. It was not known when the beautiful female dealer reappeared. She respectfully stretched out her right hand and led the way for him. There was a luxuriously decorated room behind the counter of the casino. Ning Kei and Sang Sang were led to this room. As soon as the door was closed, the noisy discussions and praises outside suddenly disappeared. A slightly fat middle-aged rich man came out from behind the curtain. He bowed to Ning Kei with hands folded in front and said very sincerely, "I'm the shopkeeper of the Ingo Casino. We are very grateful that you are willing to make friends with us." Ning Kei left the table without asking the middle-aged dealer to open the dice cup, because he knew that he had won enough and he had to save some face for the other party. Before entering the casino, he had been thinking about how to leave after winning. Now that the casino took the initiative to extend a friendly gesture, he certainly did not hesitate to accept it. The previous guest won 4,400 taels of silver. The last game was indeed the leopard. According to the rules, the owner should lose all, Ning Kei said with a smile. "I understand the rules. Go to the second round." This sentence was equivalent to giving tens of thousands of taels of silver to the casino. The shopkeeper of the Ingo Casino suddenly became more gentle and said with emotion, "My friend, you are really generous. Then I will add a round number for you on behalf of the casino and the owner to express my gratitude to you." The shopkeeper said with a kind face. If his enemies who had seen his sinister and cruel face in the past saw him being so polite to a gambler who had won more than 10,000 taels of silver from him, they would definitely be shocked. After a while, the casino changed all the chips that Ning Kei had won today into notes and sent them over. At the first time, he stopped Sang Sang's action of counting the notes with a stern look. But when he glimpsed the number 1,000 taels of silver on the thick stack of notes, he could not help but feel a little dry. The shopkeeper said with a smile, "You are welcome to play at any time in the future." "You are welcome." Ning Kei knew that the shopkeeper did not say it explicitly, but he was advising him in a euphemistic way. "Since we are friends, it is not a relationship on the gambling table. Welcome to play at any time means you are not welcome, and don't come to the Ingo Casino in the future." Just when he was about to leave the Ingo Casino with Sang Sang, the shopkeeper seemed to have just thought of something and suggested with a smile, "If you think that is not enough, I have a good suggestion. There is a newly opened casino in the West City. It was changed from Master Junjie's former pawnshop. It is really a good place to go." The meaning hidden in these words was very obscure. The shopkeeper guessed that this lad must have some background and should be able to guess the meaning of his word. But he did not expect that although Ning Kei did not have any background, when he heard the name Junjie and thought of Chao Xiaoshu's introduction at Spring Breeze Pavilion, he immediately understood what Ning Kei meant. Now the dark world of Chang An was dominated by the Fish Dragon gang. Master Junjie was finished. The pawnshop under his name was changed to a casino and reopened. Just like the Ingo Casino, there was no backer. Since Ning Kei dared to win so much money in the Ingo Casino, why not go to the West City to win again? Standing by the window, the shopkeeper could not help but frown and shake his head, his heart full of unwillingness and anger, watching the young master and his servant walking toward the West City and gradually disappearing into the night. The door was opened, and the middle-aged dealer came in with the heavy big dice cup in his arms. Looking at the back of the shopkeeper, he sighed after a moment of silence. That lad is indeed a cultivator. The middle-aged dealer was a gambling master invited by Master Meng from the Great River Kingdom. He was only responsible for holding the fort and rarely participated in the game. Today, he was forced to do it in person, but he still lost happily. The dealer had an advantage in shaking dice. He believed that no gambling master in the world could beat him under the premise that he was the dealer. Besides, no swindler could hide from his eyes, so it was very clear what was going on with that lad. Thinking that he shook a leopard in the end, and in order to maintain the face of the casino, he was forced not to open the cup. His face became more ugly, and he shook his head and said, "Even if he is a cultivator, we are too polite. Master Meng has died. Our casino can be reopened because of the pity of the 6th Master Chen in the palace for the orphans and widows left by Master Meng, and the brothers in the gang who have no place to eat. Now we have to live with our tails between our legs. How dare we make trouble? What's more, you know that lad is a cultivator. What can we do to him?" The shopkeeper reprimanded him in a low voice, and then without warning, he grabbed the black dice cup on the table and smashed it directly. There was a golden interlayer in the broken dice cup, and some patterns were faintly engraved on the interlayer. There is a soft gold interlayer in the dice cup, and it is engraved with runes. The shopkeeper said with a gloomy face, "That lad can see through the dice cup, so he is at least a cultivator in the real state. What can we do except to obediently hand over the silver?" The middle-aged dealer was stunned. He had been in the casino all year round and had a wide circle of friends. Although he was an ordinary person, he also knew the realm of cultivators. He thought that the lad was so young. Had he entered the no-doubt state? Why does such a person come to the casino? He said angrily, "I'd like to see if he dares to be so presumptuous in Western City. Although Lord Junjie is dead, the backer behind the new casino is not someone ordinary cultivators dare to provoke." The shopkeeper did not answer him. He just stared at the dice cup on the table. Looking at the soft gold in the dice cup and the runes, the more he thought about it, the more unhappy he became. He murmured, "Since the founding of the Tang Empire, I have never heard of cultivators making money by bullying casinos, because it is too degrading for them to do so. A cultivator in the real state doesn't go to the mountain gate to meditate and practice hard, doesn't communicate with his peers, doesn't travel to famous mountains and rivers, doesn't feel the breath of heaven and earth, but comes to the casino to gamble. What is this?" The shopkeeper raised his head, looked at the night outside the window, and said faintly, "This is bullying." The 200 taels of silver in Song Song's old belt had now become a thick stack of silver. It was stuffed into her waist and looked a little ugly, but she did not care and giggled foolishly from time to time. "Young master, are we really going to the casino in Western City?" "Of course. This way of making money can only be used once, so let's make as much money as we want." Logically speaking, a person like Ning Kei, who had experienced countless life-threatening situations, should know when to stop. However, he had been poor for too long. Now that he had found such a good way to earn money, he was like a poor villager who had been herding sheep in the west of the Ueluan kingdom all his life but could not even afford mutton. Now that he had found a treasure bowl that could keep jumping out of black sheep, how could he not use it? Even in the prosperous Chang'an city, more than 10,000 taels of silver was undoubtedly a huge amount of money. And if this amount of money was placed in the grassland, it was enough to make the horse gang beside Shubi Lake commit suicide before Ning Kei raised his knife. If it was placed in the city of Wei, it was enough to make those aunties who wanted to marry Sang Sang ignore Ning Kei's face and carry the bridal sedan chair to kidnap the bride. The thick stack of silver directly made Ning Kei dizzy. Even Song Song's thin and flat chest was full of grandeur at this time, and she wanted to win all the gambling houses in Chang'an City. Sure enough, there was a newly opened casino in West City. The signboard decoration was newer and larger than that of the Ingo Casino. Knowing that this casino was renovated by Junjie Shicheng's Chu pawnshop, Ning Kei was not afraid and broke in with Sang Sang. What happened next was no accident. He won money again and again. Now he had more experience and more money, so he won more quickly and fiercely. In a flash, the dealers of this new casino changed their expressions. After a discussion, they politely and threateningly invited him into the inner room and opened a new table of gambling. Anytime, anywhere. As long as the gambling house did not cheat, Ning Ke would always win. When he almost turned this new casino into a small workshop, the person behind it finally stood out. A fierce man in a green shirt, green boots and a green hat looked at Ning Ke coldly and said in a low voice, "My friend, Mr. Chi appreciates you very much and would like to invite you to have a cup of tea. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 125. A thin and tall man in a thin cyan robe was enjoying the wind on the highest stone wall of the West Gate Tower. Because he was too thin, his cyan robe seemed to be hung on a bamboo pole, fluttering in the night wind. The summer nights in Chang'an were hot and sultry. Rich families had their own maidservants to hold fans and fill their rooms with ice, while ordinary people had to open their doors and sleep on bamboo beds in the street. Everyone knew that the higher one went, the colder the night wind would be. However, the Tang Imperial Palace and the majestic city wall were not easy to climb. But the thin man in cyan robe could, because his name was Chi For, the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang in Chang'an. Everyone in Jianghu knew that Chi For was ruthless, but it had to be said that he was the most useless one among the brothers at the top of the Fish Dragon Gang. Now that Spring Breeze Pavilion Old Chow had left Chang'an and Chang 3 and the others had returned to the Imperial Court to work, he naturally took over as the leader of the Fish Dragon Gang. Now, with a casual order from him, 3,000 cyan-robed men swore to die for him. In addition, everyone now knew that the Fish Dragon Gang was a fish thrown into Jianghu by His Majesty. Even the government dared not neglect them. Undoubtedly, Mr. Chi was the only leader of the Chang'an underworld, so it was not a big deal for him to enjoy the scenery from the city tower. However, facing the night wind, Chi For, who was holding a pot of wine, did not feel proud at all. Instead, he looked gloomy. He took a sip of wine and sighed. He had successfully transformed from an ordinary underworld leader to a leader of the cultured underworld. He missed Chao Xiaoshu and his other brothers very much. However, Chao Xiaoshu had gone on a long journey, and Chang San and Chen Lu had official identities, so they could not meet at any time. Thinking of the good times of drinking and eating in the past, Mr. Chi, who was already famous in Chang'an, wished he could immediately return to the days when he was a follower. At this moment, a man came from afar on the city wall. He greeted the gate guards and hurriedly ran over. He lowered his head and said a few words in Chi Ivy's ear in shame. With a puff, Mr. Chi spat out a mouthful of wine. The wine turned into a fine mist and fell outside the bottomless city wall. He did not know if it would startle the rock eagles nesting on the city wall. He stared and asked, "Could it be wrong?" "There's no mistaking it. I've already sent someone to Ingo to inquire. That brat went there first and won more than 10,000 taels of silver." Mr. Chi still didn't believe it. He touched the back of his head and said hesitantly, "Cultivators go to the gambling house to make money? How could there be such a shameless person? Why does it sound so strange?" That subordinate said with a bitter face. No one believed it, not even the head shopkeeper at Ingo's side. But in the end, didn't he still obediently hand over the silver, and then hurriedly sent a message to us? Mr. Chi believed that his subordinates did not dare to deceive him, so he confirmed that a cultivator was shamelessly making money in his gambling house. Thinking of his elder brother's order before he left, he couldn't help but change his face. He threw the small flagon in his hand into the darkness outside the city wall and said fiercely, "Make him spit out the money, or let our brothers chop him. Damn it, he is not a sublime being in the see-through realm. Do you think that I can't chop you to death just because you know some tricks?" Although he said so, he could not do it. The Fish Dragon Gang had always been particular and tough. If Mr. Chi was really driven into a corner, he could really ask his 3,000 brothers in cyan robes to chop that cultivator to death. But the problem was that cultivators must have their own sections. He had to take a look at the background of that bastard cultivator before making a decision. The city wall of Chang'an was extremely high. It was not easy to climb up, and it was also very difficult to run down. When Mr. Qi ran back to the gambling house from the city gate, he was already exhausted and out of breath. And during this period of time, that bastard cultivator had won more money. Hearing the news, Mr. Qi's face became more and more unfriendly, and his mood became worse. But when he saw the person who pushed the door and entered, his mood and expression became extremely weird. He wanted to laugh but also wanted to cry, but he couldn't cry. He thought to himself, "What the hell is going on?" Hearing the 3 words Mr. Qi, Ning Ke pushed the door and entered. As expected, he saw the man in cyan robes who looked like a bamboo pole. Ning Ke's expression instantly became very interesting. He thought to himself, "Although we are familiar with each other, in fact, we are not that familiar. Well, for the sake of Chao Xiaoshu, I will give you a 50% discount on all the previous accounts." His reaction was so fast that he actually made 3 turns in one sentence. He thought to himself that if he acted too familiar with this man, he would be too embarrassed to take the money he won. But if he pretended to be completely unfamiliar with this man, he was afraid that the man would really turn against him. He knew very well that the Fish Dragon gang was not to be trifled with, so he finally used the name of Chao Xiaoshu. Mr. Qi was stunned by his words, and he was so angry that he almost laughed out loud. He glared at Ning Ke and said angrily, "Are you sure you want the money you won from the gambling house?" Ning Ke thought to himself, "Although we are familiar with each other, we have only met each other twice, so we are not that familiar. Do you have the nerve to refuse the money?" In fact, if it involved a small amount of money, he did not mind pretending to be a brother and a hero in front of Mr. Qi. But he had won more than 70,000 taels of silver before. For more than 70,000 taels of silver, he did not mind pretending to be dead and let Sang Sang sell herself on the street to be buried. How could he care about the old friendship and generosity? He looked at Mr. Qi, coughed twice and said, "When we first met, Mr. Qi, you said that as long as you are alive, I can do whatever I want in the Eastern City." "This is the Western City," Mr. Qi retorted angrily. Then he stood up and took out several land deeds and contracts authenticated by the government from a locked box. He threw them on the table in front of Ning Ke and said, "Anyway, this gambling house is yours. You can do whatever you want to do if you want to win." Ning Ke felt that he seemed to have misheard something. He rubbed his ears and asked, "Whose gambling house is this?" Mr. Qi poured a cup of tea and said angrily, "I told you, this is your gambling house." Ning Ke picked up the contracts on the table and glanced at them. Sure enough, he saw his name at the bottom of the contract. He suddenly froze on the spot and looked up at Mr. Qi with his eyes full of shock and confusion. "My eldest brother told me many things before he left, one of which is about you." "What is it?" "He said that you have been poor for too long these years. You have been poor for too long. That night, you dared to follow him to kill people regardless of anything just for 500 taels of silver. It's really terrible. How can a hero bow down to 5 buckets of rice?" He also worried that you would be so stupid to be a killer after being poor, so he prepared some property for you. Mr. Qi looked at Ning Ke, who was shocked and speechless as if he was a ghost. He shook his head and said angrily, "Now it seems that my eldest brother's worry is really King prescient. A cultivator actually came to the gambling house to cheat money. What the *CK is this? I say, you have been poor for so many years that you have gone crazy, haven't you? Done. Sleep. Have a good weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 126. Go Xing and Ingo. I couldn't tell them apart. They were all changed to Go Xing and Ingo. It was the ancient dragon's fault. Looking at the deed in his hand, Ning Ke felt a strange warmth in his chest as he thought that the man in the indigo robe had left a casino for him. He asked, "Where is he now?" When I received his last letter, he said he was going to Mount Tai to watch the sunrise. Mr. Qi answered. The warmth and shock gradually subsided. Ning Ke felt his cheeks burning as he thought of Mr. Qi's sarcastic words and how he cheated money into his own casino. After all, he was a young man and couldn't bear such a humiliating experience. In order to resolve the embarrassment, he said angrily, "No one from the Fish Dragon gang told me about this." Mr. Qi raised his eyebrows and glared at him, saying angrily, "Before my eldest brother left, he took us to Lin 47th Street to meet you. At that time, he told me that you could come to me whenever you wanted. It has been a few months. When did you come to me? Now you have that identity. How can I take the initiative to find you?" It was only then that Ning Ke remembered his other identity. Commander Su Chongshan had thrown him a black wooden token when they met and never contacted him again. He had long forgotten that he was still a secret guard of the Empire. While he was sighing with emotion to cover up his shame, Mr. Qi suddenly thought of something strange in this matter. He raised his eyebrows that had just calmed down and looked at the lad in shock, saying, "You are a cultivator? I know you are good at killing people. But when did you start to cultivate and enter the real state?" "It just happened 2 days ago. I'm just at the initial awareness state. I'm still far from the real state." Ning Ke did not know that there was a layer of talisman gold in the black dice cup of the star-picking casino. He answered honestly, "I wanted to make more money when no one knew about it. Although I can't make money now, please keep it a secret." Mr. Qi's voice became sharp and worried. "You won more than 10,000 taels of silver from Go Xing Casino. How can you keep it a secret? Chang'an is a big city, but not many people can run around with a little black handmaiden. You can be found out with a little inquiry." Ning Ke smiled and said gently, "You are now the boss of Chang'an City. Isn't it easy for you to let go of such a trivial matter? Do you think the star-picking casino would dare to go against your orders and continue to investigate me?" Mr. Qi couldn't refuse his flattery. He frowned and thought for a while, saying, "It's not difficult to hide it, but what's the point of hiding the identity of a cultivator? Don't tell me you're hoping that this matter will blow up and help you gain some fame in the Empire? If that's what you mean, I suggest you don't think so. After all, Chang'an is not a rural city. You can easily find hundreds of cultivators. You can't be too conspicuous. In my opinion, you'd better explain to the instructor of the academy. It's more important to get some practical benefit." Ning Ke thought of the legendary second floor of the academy that would open next year and General Xiahou, who was at the distant frontier for the Empire at this time. After a moment of silence, he smiled and replied, "Because I know I'm too ordinary, I don't have to say it out and cause trouble. It's okay to say it out when I can go further on this road in the future. You're not a member of the Fish Dragon gang. You can do whatever you want. But since I rarely meet you today, I'd better finish the formalities as soon as possible." Mr. Qi stretched out his slender fingers and pointed at the land deed in front of him. He said, "There's a transfer agreement that needs your signature. From now on, this casino will be transferred to you. I don't have to waste my energy to manage it on your behalf anymore." Ning Ke thought that this couldn't work. A casino needed manpower, money, and background. He was going to study in the academy, so he couldn't let little Sang Sang wear a dealer's uniform to manage a dozen gambling tables. He rolled his eyes slightly and said with a smile, "My good brother, please continue to manage it. I really don't have the ability or the time." After a dispute, Mr. Qi finally failed to resist Ning Ke's continuous flattery and shameless spirit. He had no choice but to agree to Ning Ke's conditions. The casino was still Ning Ke's, but it would be entrusted to the Fish Dragon Gang. Ning Ke didn't need to do anything but get the monthly dividends according to the proportion agreed by both parties. After the negotiation, Ning Ke left the newly opened casino in the West City with Sang Sang immediately without having supper or calling over girls. He left in such a hurry as if he was fleeing for his life. Even when he returned home on Lin 47th Street, he remembered that he didn't even remember the name of the casino. Sang Sang took out the thick stack of banknotes from her belt and put them into the box. She looked around the shabby bedroom. Her willow-like eyes kept wandering from beam to beam and mouse hole to think of the safest place to put it. In the end, she lifted the bed board according to the old way and carefully hid the box in it. Looking back, she saw Ning Ke sitting on the armchair in a daze. The expression on his face was very complicated and wonderful, as if he was dumbfounded by the cornucopia in the sky, or as if he was hit so hard that he wanted to cry. "Young master, you are a little strange today." Sang Sang looked at him and asked curiously, "Just now, when you left the casino, you looked as if you owed someone 800 taels of silver. You were so embarrassed." "How could I not be embarrassed? I've been so embarrassed today. I've never done such a stupid thing in my life," Ning Ke answered angrily. Suddenly he thought of the box of banknotes under the bed board, and the embarrassment on his face was immediately replaced by joy. "But if I can make so much money every time, I'm willing to be stupid all the time." After saying this, he stopped smiling and gestured for Sang Sang to sit on the small stool in front of him. He said in a very serious tone, "I think it's necessary to have a family meeting." For Ning Ke, family meetings were one of the most unforgettable and uncomfortable experiences in his previous life. Perhaps it was because he was seriously affected subconsciously. In this life, there were only him and Sang Sang in the small family, but whether it was in the Min Mountain cottage or the small courtyard in the city of Wei, he would often ask for a family meeting. Sang Sang knew that the young master was going to start talking nonsense again, so she went to get her sewing bag and changed into a pair of comfortable cotton slippers. Then she sat on the small stool in front of him and waited respectfully for his lecture. In the middle of every study room in the academy, there are some famous sayings of the predecessors. Although I don't think the writing is good, the meaning of those sayings is not too wrong. Sang Sang lowered her head and concentrated on getting the insole. She did not even raise her head after hearing this, but just made a sound with her little nose, indicating that she heard it, and asked the young master to continue. Ning Ke looked at her and shook his head. She had been like this in every family meeting these years. He had said it many times, but it had no effect. He really could not do anything to her, so he just ignored her and continued to talk, hoping that the only audience would not slip away. In fact, there is a saying like this: the environment changes one's temperament, and the upbringing changes one's constitution. What does this saying mean? It means that when you have 2,000 taels of silver, you can't be as stingy as when you only have 20 taels of silver, and you can't always eat leftovers. Hearing this, Sang Sang raised her head and looked at him, her face full of grievance and dissatisfaction. "Well, being thrifty is indeed a virtue, but you have to think about it. We are really not short of money now. We have more than 10,000 taels of silver in our hands, and the gambling house still sends dividends to us every month. We can't live with the mentality of the poor anymore. We can't be like the desperate and desperate people who see a way to make money." Ning Ke sighed and said, "In other words, the affairs of scholars are the affairs of scholars, and the affairs of cultivators are also the affairs of cultivators. We have to be noble and proud, and don't always think about making money by doing these things. It will make people feel that we are degrading. So I have decided not to go to the gambling house to win money in the future. I am worried that the instructors of the academy will be angry if they know. At the same time, I have decided to withdraw all my masterpieces from the front shops from tomorrow onwards. As for the business, I will buy some cheap scrolls from poor scholars from the fragrance workshop to sell, and earn some difference." Sang Sang threaded the needle and thread through the insole and pulled it hard. She opened her mouth to bite the thread and tore it. Then she asked with puzzled eyes, "Not even one scroll to be sold? Young master, doesn't this seem a little like the poor suddenly getting rich?" Ning Ke was stunned by her words. He coughed twice and said, "The adjectives you used are not very good. This is not called the poor suddenly getting rich. It should be called being content with a little bit of wealth. Of course, it is not good for the poor suddenly getting rich, and it is not good to be content with a little bit of wealth. Then I will hang a few of my works in the front shop, but the price will be raised, and I will not sell them for less than 1,000 taels of gold." Sang Sang thought to herself, "Young master, your most expensive painting was only sold for 20 taels of silver, and even the most expensive one was sold. That day, you specially ordered me to cook a pot of braised pork to celebrate that I finally made a fool of a rich man. Now you say that your scrolls will not be sold for less than 1,000 taels of gold. Although there are indeed many stupid and rich people in Chang'an, how can there be so many fools?" Looking at the strong puzzled look in the little girl's black eyes, Ning Ke raised his eyebrows and explained with a smile, "Remember, we are too rich now, and we are not short of that little bit of wealth. This is like buying a horse's bones with 1,000 taels of gold, and it can increase our reputation." According to his instructions, the next day, Sang Sang removed most of his scrolls from the old brush pen shop, and then went to the fragrance workshop to buy a lot of new works of calligraphers. When there were customers who liked Ning Ke's scrolls and inquired about them, she would honestly tell them that the owner's handwriting was extremely precious, so it could not be changed by 1,000 taels of gold. The development of the situation was different from what Ning Ke had expected. Marking his calligraphy at 1,000 taels of gold did not make the reputation of the old brush pen shop soar. Instead, the shop's business became worse and worse. Other than receiving a lot of cynicism such as, "Is the boss of this shop crazy because of poverty?" there was no other gain. However, now that the master and the servant had suddenly become too damn rich from the poor, it was really like the poor suddenly getting rich. Even Sang Sang did not care much about the income of the old brush pen shop, and Ning Ke was busy reviewing his lessons in the academy every day, and was busy going to the old library to ask his friend about the various Dharma access in the cultivation world. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 127. There were 6 subjects in the academy, and each of them was troublesome. For Ning Ke, mathematics, writing and archery were naturally at his fingertips, but the remaining 3 subjects, etiquette, calligraphy and music, were torturous to him. Etiquette and calligraphy could be memorized, and he believed that as long as he regained a heart that loved his grades more than money, he would definitely be able to overcome this obstacle. However, those musical instruments were not his forte, and they were not his favorite. Every time he held a flute in the study room and was speechless, he could not help but think of Chen Pippi's previous 2 messages. In those messages, Chen Pippi had unceremoniously compared him to an eyeless, stupid piece of wood, and a flute that could not be played. Looking at the flute in his hand, he had to admit that this was probably some kind of restriction that Haotian had placed on him. He wanted to graduate from the academy and enter the 2nd floor. He had already missed a semester exam, so he naturally could not sit out every exam and be a hero with a blank paper. There was no hope for music, so he was especially diligent in learning the other 5 subjects. Other than the academic pressure, there were other reasons that made him so hard-working. Since the semester exam, most of the students in the academy, including most of his classmates in classroom 3, thought that he had given up the exam, feigned illness, and was extremely unbearable. Although they did not mock or ridicule him in front of him, not many people were willing to talk to him. Their gazes and behavior were full of avoidance and alienation. It did not matter if he was ignored or deliberately given the cold shoulder. He was not a person who would warm his face to the cold buttocks of others. Since he was faintly excluded from the group of the academy, then he would study seriously. However, sometimes when he walked alone in the academy, he would still feel a little down. At this time, he would comfort himself with the cold eyes of his classmates after he became a provincial triple merit student in his previous life. As the saying goes, the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind, the pile on the shore will be destroyed by the current, and those who are better than others will be criticized by others. As the saying goes, the beam that sticks out is always the first to rot, and the fattest pig in the pen, bah! Ning Kai fiercely spat into the shallow wetland filled with fine grass. He raised his chin and ignored his two classmates who wanted to ignore him. Carrying the paper bag in his hand, he leisurely walked towards the old library. Walking up to the second floor of the old library, he bowed to the female professor respectfully and put the paper bag on the table by the west window. He walked to the bookshelf and glanced at the thickly dotted cultivation books. Although he could sense the breath of heaven and earth, and even won a lot of money, it was a pity that these books were still as difficult to understand as the wordless heavenly book. He could only remember the strokes, but still could not store any word in his mind. He took a thick copy of the Dictionary of 10,000 Arts Appreciation and sat down on the floor under the west window. He looked at the blazing sunlight outside through the window crack and began to read it without much interest. Time passed by. When he reached the 17th page of the 8 strokes calligraphy of Jung, the blazing sunlight quietly disappeared through the window crack. The old library was shrouded in darkness, but he did not get up to leave. The beautiful female professor by the east window had finished today's hairpin-style small regular script. She packed up her writing brush, ink, paper and inkstone, gently rubbed her wrist and stood up. Seeing Ning Kai leaning against the wall and staring at the thick dictionary in a daze, she could not help but smile gently. She did not remind Ning Kai that it was already late and just quietly walked out of the old library. As the night deepened, the talisman inscriptions on the bookshelf glowed with a faint luster. Ning Kai was not frightened, but stared at the talisman inscriptions seriously. He watched as the luster disappeared in a flash, and the talisman inscriptions returned to their original white and crude appearance. Then, he watched as the bookshelf slid away from the wall without a sound, and a fat lad came out, panting. This was the second time Ning Kai and Chen Pippi met each other after countless messages. When they first met that night, Ning Kai was on the verge of death and unconscious. When he woke up in the morning, he was too tired and did not take a good look at Chen Pippi's appearance. However, he did not want to miss this opportunity today and stared at Chen Pippi with his bright eyes for a long time. "I say, you are really fat." Ning Kai looked at Chen Pippi and exclaimed, "I really don't know what you've eaten in the past 16 years. How could you be so fat? But fortunately, you're round and firm enough, so you don't look wretched or disgusting. But there is one thing I really don't understand. Are you really the only talented lad in the Academy entrance examination of the Academy in 100 years to get 6 A+ grades? You also got A+ grades in driving? Where can the military ministry find a military horse that can carry you and run so fast?" Chen Pippi's big round face was full of shame and anger after hearing such a long paragraph of words. His soybean-like eyes flashed with anger and he said angrily, Driving. I chose driving." Ning Kai suddenly understood and sincerely praised, "That's a very wise choice." Chen Pippi covered his forehead and did not bother to pay attention to him. He directly asked, "What do you want to see me for?" Ning Kai smiled gently and said, "Let's talk about those trivial things later. I brought you some food." As he spoke, he took out a few big white steamed buns and some pickled vegetables from the paper bag. He warmly said, "Let's talk while eating. The small pickled vegetables in the Academy's kitchen are good. I don't know if you have any on the mountain. The steamed buns are a little cold. I don't know if you can get used to it and if you can eat your fill. Chen Pippi looked at the food on the ground and refused to sit down. He said incredulously, I know you have a favor to ask of me, but I really didn't expect you to only bring a few cold steamed buns and pickled vegetables. How is this the attitude of asking for help? I say, you should at least bring a few bowls of crab porridge. The crab porridge in the kitchen has to be paid for separately. It is not included in the accommodation fee. Why waste it? Ning Ke laughed and continued to ask him to sit down. And let's not use such ugly words as asking for help. It should be considered as learning from each other. Learning from each other. Chen Pippi scornfully looked at him and said, Do you think you are qualified to learn from each other? Ning Ke continued to beckon him to sit down. He seriously replied, I have just started my journey. But who knows who will go further on this road in the future? If you treat me better now, I will return the favor in the future. You won't be at a disadvantage. Besides, I can teach you math, right? Chen Pippi was really confused by his word. He proudly snorted and sat beside him. He reached out to pick up a cold steamed bun and a handful of pickled vegetables, putting them into his mouth and eating. Why do you always act at night? Isn't it better to meet during the day? Ning Ke asked. Chen Pippi answered vaguely while chewing the steamed bun. Senior sister, you has been practicing regular script here during the day. How dare I come here? You have to understand that the Academy's rules forbid us from helping students outside the building. I risked being beaten by senior brother to leave a message for you. Why don't you express your gratitude? Aren't I treating you to a steamed bun? Ning Ke replied with a smile. I know the Academy's rules are strict. Those instructors often use their old fists to beat people. Why do I feel that you are more afraid of second brother? Chen Pippi glanced at him. He knew that this guy was curious about the situation in the back of the mountain of the Academy. He sneered and said, Compared with second brother's fists, the Academy's rules are too gentle. They were both 16 or 17 years old and had a huge appetite. The two of them devoured the steamed bun and pickled vegetables like a whirlwind. Chen Pippi then stole the female professor's kettle by the east window and drank 2 mouthfuls to moisten his throat. Then he rubbed his belly and looked at Ning Ke, pretending to be indifferent. He said, Tell me, what do you want to know today? If you want to know how to enter the second floor, then forget it. Although the headmaster loves me very much, I can't say anything about such important things. We've known each other for a long time. Do you think I'm the kind of person who wants to reap without sowing? Ning Ke laughed disdainfully to hide his disappointment. He then said, Today I want to ask you something. I can sense the breath of nature now. What should I do next? You've just entered the initial awareness state. You should cultivate your mind and stabilize your cultivation first. Don't be greedy. Chen Pippi explained very seriously. Suddenly, he frowned and his right hand, which was secretly making emblematic gestures behind his back, froze. He slowly raised his head and looked at Ning Ke's eyes. He asked hesitantly, You've only opened 10 acupoints? Ning Ke honestly said, I tried to look inside last night, but the picture in my mind was too vague. The ocean of qi and mountain of snow were like 2 ink balls. I really couldn't see how many of the 17 acupoints were opened. Today, I also want to ask you to help me take a look. Chen Pippi shook his head and sighed. There's no need to look. Indeed, you've only opened 10 acupoints. You're standing on the line between life and death. If your willpower is slightly weaker, it's definitely impossible. He looked at Ning Ke expressionlessly. He thought to himself that this guy had eaten such a precious heavenly power pill. Although he didn't know about it, he was sure that this guy must have had other adventures and finally changed his fate by forcibly opening his acupoints. This was already an anomaly in the world. However, such an anomaly had only opened 10 acupoints. It was a pity and pitiful. Ning Ke didn't show any resentment on his face. After a slight pause, he smiled and said, It's much better than knowing nothing at all. You don't have to be completely disappointed. Those who can enter the second floor are not necessarily geniuses in cultivation. Seeing that he didn't feel remorseful, Chen Pippi felt the need to comfort him. He patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "The master never chooses disciples based on their cultivation potential. If you can reach the pinnacle in other aspects, you might be able to catch the master's eye. When that happens, you won't be able to not enter the second floor even if you don't want to." Ning Ke knew that he was comforting him and smiled gratefully. His gaze subconsciously fell on the row of bookshelves behind him. He knew that behind the bookshelves was the passage to the legendary second floor. He just didn't know if he would be so lucky in the future. Or would he really have to pry open the bookshelves like the female professor had said? He retracted his gaze and continued to ask, "If the state of initial awareness is to sense the existence of the breath of nature, then how do I use it next? I can already sense the existence of specific objects through the breath of nature, but I can't move them. I'm not greedy, I'm just curious. You can sense specific objects." Chen Pippi stared at him with his small round eyes. "Yes." Ning Ke counted with his fingers and gave an example. "On the first night, I sensed the candlelight, then the pillow, the paper, the bed, the silver, the leaves in the yard, and a bowl of hot and sour noodle slice soup." Chen Pippi's eyes widened even more. He thought to himself that to sense specific objects, one needed to be in harmony with the qi of heaven and earth, and also needed to communicate with the qi of heaven and earth. Only in this way could one sense the outside world through the qi of heaven and earth. This was something that could only be done in the state of perception. How could you do it? This chapter has been edited. I'm starving. I'll continue after eating a bowl of instant noodles. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 128. Chen Pippi scratched his head and asked confusedly, "Are you sure you sensed something like candlelight, pillow, paper, noodle soup? Are you sure you didn't open your eyes?" Seeing that he obviously didn't believe him, Ning Ke frowned and explained, "Yes, I didn't open my eyes, and I couldn't see it through the wall and the bedboard. Oh yes, last night I went to a friend's casino in Southern City to play for a while. I could clearly feel the dent on the dices through the dice cup. Isn't that perception? You couldn't see through the dice cup, so of course it counts." Chen Pippi tilted his head and looked at Ning Ke thoughtfully. Ning Ke didn't notice that Chen Pippi's gaze was a little strange. He couldn't help thinking about what happened in the casino last night and how he promised Mr. Qi and Sang Sang that he wouldn't cheat in that way anymore. He looked back at Chen Pippi and wanted to say something but stopped. After a while, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Is there any way to move the dices through the dice cup?" Chen Pippi was shocked and stared at him as if he was looking at a ghost. He angrily rebuked, "You can finally cultivate after changing your fate, but you only want to move the dices to cheat? Is there anyone like you in the world? What a waste of God's gift." At this moment, this young cultivation genius, who was extremely envious of Ning Ke and Haotian's care, finally couldn't suppress his emotions anymore. He rolled up his sleeves and wanted to beat Ning Ke up. Seeing his action, Ning Ke waved his hands and explained, "I was thinking that if I could move the dice through the dice cup, it would mean that I could mobilize the qi of heaven and earth to control other things. I was just trying to find an easy-to-understand example that could be appreciated by both young and old. Why are you so angry? Do you really think I'm stupid enough to gamble with the qi of heaven and earth?" Hearing this sincere and credible explanation, Chen Pippi angrily sat down again. He angrily glared at Ning Ke and then controlled his temper to explain, "The initial awareness state is the virtual state. One can only feel or communicate with the qi of heaven and earth, but he can't affect the real world through the qi of heaven and earth. Only after entering the no-doubt state of reality can cultivators condense the chi of heaven and earth into lines or bridges and touch the outside world through the air. A sword master can control a flying sword and a warrior can hurt people through the air. Ning Ke said thoughtfully. Not bad. Chun Pippi continued. If you want to control the dice through the dice cup, you must first enter the real world. No doubt state is the third state. Ning Ke shook his head and sighed. I can't reach it in a short time. Chun Pippi glanced at him with a strange expression. He was too lazy to reveal certain matters. He said, even if you have entered the corporeal realm, you cannot use the primal energies of the universe to control anything. Cultivators who have the ability to control all things are truly great cultivators. They can only do this after breaking through certain invisible laws. Could it be that there are other rules for the practitioners in no-doubt state to control foreign objects? Of course. I've heard you say that you've seen a battle between cultivators before. Have you ever seen a swordsman reveal 3 rows of flying daggers when he lifts his robes? Have you ever seen those Buddhist disciples make 36,000 bronze Buddhas to smash people? Ning Ke recalled the 2 cultivators killed by Chao Xiaoshu that night at the Spring Breeze Pavilion. The swordsman from South Jin Kingdom indeed only had 1 sword. After the sword was broken, he died. The sadhu from Yueluan Kingdom had more weapons beside him, but they were only a copper bowl and a string of prayer beads. Cultivators in no-doubt state and see-through state have their own exclusive perceptual object. If you want to enter the real state from the emptiness state, you must first cultivate your own exclusive perceptual objects with psyche power, which is also called natal items. Ning Ke asked confusedly, what is natal item? I've only heard of natal year. The sword of a sword master is his natal sword. The most important thing for a talisman master is his natal talisman. At this time, the sword and talisman are his natal items. Then what is the natal item of a psyche master? If you can only understand the common way of explaining it, then you can understand it as the psyche master himself. Chun Pippi answered angrily. Suddenly, he remembered the words Ning Ke mentioned earlier and asked confusedly, what is natal year? Do you know what an ellipsis is? I don't know, and I don't want to know. As for why cultivators had to have their own natal items, you first had to understand 2 things. First, the world was filled with primal energies of the world. Even the smallest space, a rock, a withered willow, a lake, they all contained their own primal energies of the world. Second, a cultivator does not rely on the chi of heaven and earth to directly affect the matter in the world. Instead, he must use the chi of heaven and earth as a bridge to transmit the psyche power produced in his spiritual world to the object, and then trigger the vibration of the chi of heaven and earth inside the object. If that's the case, then why must there be an exclusive object? Let me use the example given in the first message. The psyche power in a cultivator's body is like the breath, and the snow sea and chi mountain are the flute and bamboo flute. Only when the flute makes a sound that can be heard and understood by the chi of heaven and earth can one perceive the chi of heaven and earth. But the problem is that the quality of the flute and bamboo flute is different for everyone. The broad chi of heaven and earth can be understood, but it doesn't mean that the chi of heaven and earth in the lake, wood, stone, and water can be understood. A cultivator seeks and cultivates his own natal item, which is to find an object that can understand and listen to his music. Do you understand such an idiotic explanation? I roughly understand. Is it like the principle of resonance? What's resonance? Chun Pippi rubbed his fat face tiredly and ignored the boring interruption. He continued, when a cultivator enters the real state, the more compatible the natal item is with his breath, the easier it will be for him to improve his state in the future. But it is too difficult to find a natal item that is completely compatible with his breath. So many cultivators choose to carve talismans on it to distort the characteristics of the object, and then cultivate it with their own psyche power for many years until their minds are connected. Thinking of the terms Liu Qinchen mentioned in the carriage, Ning Ke knew that Chen Pippi was telling the truth. He scratched the back of his hand and asked with a smile, "That is to say, if I want to be a sword master, I have to first get a good sword, then hug it to sleep every day, and finally cultivate a little affection? It's up to you if you want to understand it so idiotically," Chen Pippi said unhappily. "Hey, you were the one who said telepathy first, okay?" Ning Ke waved his hand and suddenly thought of an important question. How many natal items can a person have? What is your natal item? Why should I tell you my natal item? Chen Pippi stared at him and said, "The stronger the ability, the more subtle the state, and the more chi of heaven and earth you can understand, the more natal items you can have. For example, in the upper see-through state, the subtle state or the knowing destiny state, you only need to know the breath of trees to control trees, and you only need to know the breath of lakes to control lake. But for ordinary cultivators, they will only choose one to ensure the effect. If I choose to hug the sword to sleep every night, will I still be able to control the dice? As long as you have enough energy to study, it's easy to play with these little things. Hey, why are you still thinking about this? It doesn't seem like an example. It's just an example, just an example. Don't think too much." From late at night to early morning, the 16-year-old fat lad continued to teach and answer questions for the 16-year-old, who was also a beginner in cultivation, completely forgetting the academy's rules and his own reminder. He spoke very seriously and the other listened very seriously. All kinds of principles in the cultivation world were explained in simple terms. Since childhood, he had lived in the lofty unknown place of the West Hill Divine Kingdom. After leaving home, he meditated and cultivated every day in the back of the mountain of the academy. For 16 years, he did not care about worldly affairs and did not know what intrigues were. The genius Chen Pippi was proud and arrogant, but the heart in his plump body was so crystal clear and pure that it moved people. Since childhood, he had lived in the miserable grassland of Min Mountain, where it was difficult to survive. After the age of 4, he had been killing people every day in the rain of blood. He had experienced countless life and death experiences in the past 16 years, and under the fresh and joyful face hid vigilance and indifference. Unfortunately, Ning Ke was not moved at all that night. It was not until many years later that he realized how lucky he was at that time. The next day, Ning Ke returned to his home on Lin 47th Street at dusk. He asked Sang Sang to close the shop and prepare dinner. Then he went back to his bedroom and sat on the armchair by the window, staring at the green tree in the narrow courtyard in a daze. Being in a daze was meditation. At this time, he was slowly releasing the psyche power in the spiritual world through the snow mountain and ocean of chi, exploring the things in the courtyard one by one. According to the method taught by Chen Pippi, he maintained a clear and happy heart and purely followed the aura of the psyche power to find the things around him that could connect with his mind the most. Weak but extremely pure psyche power emanated from his body. He felt the fluctuation of the breath between heaven and earth, and then kept moving. He sensed the newly embroidered insole on the windowsill, the ants crawling under the tree, the banknotes and silver ingots in the box under the bed, and many other things, but he did not receive any response. The chi of heaven and earth existed in all things in the world. According to Chen Pippi's teaching, the internal chi of all things would have a natural resistance to the cultivator's psyche power. However, if an object could feel the kindness and joy in the aura of the cultivator's psyche power, and if the two could coexist harmoniously, then there would be a response. Kindness and joy. Should I go to the front shop to find some ink and paper to try? As he was thinking about this, he suddenly heard Sang Sang's cry from outside the window, followed by a string of bell-like laughter. He opened the window in confusion and saw Sang Sang, who was drawing water and washing rice by the well with her back facing him. Her little hands were waving behind her waist to block, and she said anxiously, "Young master, don't tickle me, it's itchy." Through the window, Ning Kei looked at Sang Sang, who kept twisting her waist to avoid Song Song's touch, and was shocked speechless. It would make sense if Sang Sang, who had grown up with him, was the one who had the most telepathic connection. But was he going to make her his natal sword? Absolutely not. Thinking of a certain possibility, he gasped and shook his head repeatedly. If he really did that, then when he met General Xiaohou in the future and was beaten to a pulp, would he have to pinch the sword formula and shout, "Don't be so arrogant, you thief, look at Sang Sang." Wahahaha, I'm not going to write the first chapter. It's too fun and too tiring. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 129. At the critical moment of life and death, he could rely on Sang Sang, but not Sang Sang. Ning Kei sat by the window and watched the little girl in a daze. He wondered if he really had to go to the front shop to get close to the brush, ink, paper and inkstone to decide on a natal item. But the brush he was used to was a brush, not a judge's pen, the ink was pine ink instead of stone, the inkstone was mud, and the paper was bud paper. How could he use them to make weapons? Moreover, these were the things of scholars. It would be inappropriate to let the brush, ink, paper and inkstone fly all over the sky to fight with cultivators. When thinking about these difficult questions, he held something in his hand and kept playing with it. There was too much silver in the old brush pen shop. Sang Sang had used to spread silver all over the bed, and most of them had been exchanged for notes. Notes were not as good as silver ingots, so he kept a new piece of snowflake silver and played with it every day. The snowflake silver was slightly cool and smooth, and it was much more comfortable than those peach stones and stone balls for a poor lad who suddenly got rich. In the following time, Ning Kei kept a clear and kind heart and kept trying to find a natal item that matched his psyche power. During this period, he successfully made the candle shake and extinguish, and also made a corner of the paper on the wardrobe fly away. But he still could not find a suitable one. This situation lasted until late at night. The cicadas chirped and the summer heat was not weak. The dim, bean-sized candle on the table was constantly releasing endless heat. The master and his servant, who were wearing thin robes, sat at the table and stared at each other. They did not speak for a long time. Sang Sang rested her head on her arms and leaned on the edge of the table. She opened her willowy eyes and stared at the slowly moving silver ingot on the table. She said firmly, "Young master, although this piece of silver does respond strongly to your psyche power, I still firmly oppose it. What if you throw it out in a fight and can't take it back? An ingot of silver is 20 taels. We will lose all our family property in a few years." The next day, Ning Kei went to the academy and stayed in the old library until late at night. He waited for the bookshelf to move and Chun Pippi came out. Ning Kei sprung up from the ground and told Chun Pippi about his experience in Lin 47th Street. Then he asked a question that seemed very important to him. "Why can't I remember the contents of these books? Didn't senior sister you tell you?" The cultivation books in the old library were all written by former grand cultivators with psyche power. Every character in the books was the best of the divine talisman master. Only when you enter the upper state of see-through can you see through the hidden meaning. You are still far away from that state. Ning Kei thought of the female professor's reminder to himself and Xie Qingyun that day. He scratched his head and sighed. He suddenly thought and looked at Chun Pippi and asked, "Then are you in the upper state of see-through state?" Chen asked. "No." Chen's answer was very indifferent, and did not look. Ning Kei now knew the temperament of his peer very well. Because of his calm expression, Ning Kei guessed that his real state should be above the upper grade of see-through. He could not help but feel shocked. He thought that Mr. Liu Qingchen only stepped into the see-through state when he was old and weak, but the fat lad in front of him had already surpassed the see-through state and entered the knowing destiny state. So young, you are really a peerless genius. He looked at Chun Pippi's big round face and sighed with admiration. Although you don't look like a genius, and you don't look like a grand cultivator in knowing destiny state. Chun Pippi was speechless and did not know how to respond. He thought, are you admiring me or mocking me? Knowing that this guy was actually a grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state, Ning Ke was in awe. He always felt that he was talking to a sage-like old man with a white beard. He said respectfully, I say, genius brother, since you are such a genius, you must be able to solve my dyslexia. Please give me more advice. His voice was gentle and sweet, and his flattery was not hidden. It seemed that Chun Pippi really liked it. He smiled proudly and said, the characters need to be seen as a whole, because each character is a world with its own soul. You can avoid being hurt by the meaning of the characters by deconstructing them with the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong. But you can only see some fragments of this world, and naturally can't be stored in the spiritual world. If it's an ordinary person, he won't be able to understand these books if he hasn't reached the superior level of see-through. But in my opinion, you might really be able to find some side roads, and this road still lies in your Yong 8 characters method. Ning Ke moved to his side and put on a posture of listening attentively. You are good at calligraphy. You can use the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to deconstruct these characters into stroke. You can try to remember the order and number of strokes unintentionally. Then when you leave the old library, you can use the method of writing to recombine them in your consciousness. In this way, the characters are still the same characters, but they have already got rid of the meaning above the structure given by the divine talisman master who copied the book. Ning Ke seemed to be thinking. Chun Pippi reminded him, I just put forward a possibility. Whether it will succeed or not, you still need to carry out countless attempts. The final result may be successful or not. It's better to have a try than to have no way at all. Ning Ke suddenly thought of the attempt he made according to the method taught by Chun Pippi last night. He stood up excitedly and took out a flint to light a candle. Then he put the candle on the table by the west window and returned to the original place, saying, Look at the result of my practice. As soon as he finished speaking, the middle and index fingers of his right hand formed a sword. He waved his arm and stabbed the candle on the table from afar. His psyche power seeped out of his body and controlled the chi of heaven and earth to follow his fingertip. There was no sound of thunder, nor was there any great movement of heaven and earth. The dim candle on the table swayed a few times before quickly returning to its calm state. It was as if it had only been blown by a few strands of summer wind that had leaked in through the west window. Chun Pippi frowned. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, Weak. After a night of hard work and sensing the objects in the courtyard, he finally developed such an ability. But in the end, he only got a faint word from his companion. Although he knew that Chun Pippi was a cultivation genius and his current state was as dim as the candle on the table in front of him, Ning Ke still felt a little unhappy. He took out a piece of silver and slammed it on the floor in front of them. He said angrily, Look at this first and then make a comment. After a moment, Chun Pippi widened his eyes and stared at the slowly moving silver ingot on the floor. He said incredulously, This feeling is not bad. I say, how greedy are you? How much do you like silver? Ning Ke forcibly suppressed the pride in his heart and rubbed between his eyebrows that were stuffy because of the excessive output of psyche power. He said calmly and carelessly, I'm not greedy. Brother Silver knows that I pity them. In other words, these silver know that you're stingy and don't want to spend them. That's why they responded to your psyche power with joy. You're not just weak, you're so weak. Chun Pippi looked at him with a sneer and said, If you want to cultivate the silver ingot into your natal item, it's up to you. Although I haven't seen any cultivator play like this before, I have to remind you that you've already used all your strength. This silver ingot can only struggle for a while like a dead white maggot. What's the use of it? After another wasted midnight, Chun Pippi returned to the back of the mountain from the old library. Stepping on the stone path that was shrouded in fog, he could not help but sigh when he thought that he had wasted precious cultivation time on that guy. The night fog in front of the stone path suddenly dispersed, and a tall figure suddenly appeared. Although it was deep in the night and the vision was extremely dark, one could still clearly see that this person's black hair was combed very neatly, and the golden silk ribbon on his waist did not move an inch. The rather ancient hat on his head was as still as the eaves of a palace hall. Why did you go to the old library every night these days? Which book in the library can't you remember and have to read at night? Don't tell me that you went to check the ancient Zhou Wright's classics again. Chun Pippi looked at his most respected second brother, bowed with a bitter face, and reported truthfully, "Senior brother, I went to the old library because I met a friend in the front yard. So I went to chat with him." Second brother said with appreciation, "A gentleman's friendship depends on sincerity, regardless of the state. Although you are a classmate in the front yard, you are still a classmate. It's worth a reward for you to overcome your habit of sleeping and eating to accompany him. But you should remember the rules of the academy. You'd better not talk nonsense." "No way." Chun Pippi raised his head and cried out. "Don't you know how timid I am, second brother? How dare I leak any information to the classmates in the front yard? We just talked about some math questions." Hearing the words math questions, second brother, who looked serious and square, suddenly thought of the question that Chun Pippi brought back to the back mountain one day. Thinking of the painful time he spent day and night in the room thinking hard about math behind the back of his junior brothers and sisters, his eyebrows and eyes trembled a few times, which was very rare. He said in a slightly hoarse voice, "So it's that guy." Because he didn't want to recall that painful time, and he didn't want to think of the number of answers that he couldn't write down even though there were piles of paper in the room, second brother turned around and went to the stone ground with a gloomy face. Chun Pippi thought of something and quickened his pace to catch up with second brother. Panting, he followed second brother and said, "Second brother, there's something I want to ask you." "What is it?" "There's a guy with very poor cultivation potential. Out of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow, he only opened 10 acupoints. 14 days ago, he was barely able to sense the breath of heaven and earth and enter the initial awareness state. But now he is inexplicably able to perceive foreign objects, and he even has one foot in the no-doubt state. Is he a genius?" Second brother suddenly stopped and looked back at Chun Pippi coldly. He guessed that Chun Pippi was talking about the juvenile classmate in the front yard. After frowning for a moment, he replied with great certainty, "Of course. He is not a genius. Why? From the initial awareness state to the perception state and then to the no-doubt state in 14 days. There can't be such a genius in the world. This kind of person can only be a monster because it took me 15 days to complete this process." When second brother said this, there was no complacency or pride on his face, but the hidden meaning in his words was extremely proud and confident. It took him 15 days to break through 3 states, so it was impossible for anyone in the world to do the same thing in less than 15 days. Looking at second brother's neat black hair, Chun Pippi's heart was full of respect and admiration. He thought that it took him 17 days to break through 3 states after taking the heavenly power pill. Second brother was enlightened in a rural place like Linquan town, where there was neither a wise teacher nor a Taoist sect, but it only took him 15 days. He was really more vigorous than a peerless cultivation genius like himself. Chun Pippi praised and asked curiously, "What about eldest brother?" "Eldest brother, he is also a monster. Second brother seemed to recall some old pain. He stretched his hands to his head and adjusted his slightly tilted ancient hat. He said solemnly, "Eldest brother was enlightened at the age of 13, and then he was in a daze at the back of the mountain of the academy for 17 years before he understood the meaning of the no-doubt state." He entered the no-doubt state at the age of 30? Chen Pippi said incredulously, "Eldest brother is too." Second brother looked back at him and said disdainfully, "Too what? Too stupid?" Eldest brother reached the no-doubt state at the age of 30, but it only took him 3 months to understand the see-through state. Of course, at that time I was already at the upper grade of the see-through state. After saying this, he was silent for a long time. Then he looked up at the night fog between the mountain path and sighed deeply. He said, "That day, eldest brother understood the see-through state in the morning, and entered the knowing destiny state by watching the sunset clouds in the evening. He passed the most exquisite 2 states in one night. The teacher praised him at that time, saying that he understood the Tao in the morning and entered the Tao in the evening. I am no match for him." In the night fog on the mountain path, the voice faded away. Second brother of the academy and Chen Pippi, who claimed to be geniuses and were indeed geniuses, were silent for a long time when they recalled the moment when the scholar showed his face under the sunset clouds. The road of cultivation in the world was long, and the higher one went, the more difficult it was to climb. Many cultivators who were regarded as geniuses at a young age could reach the initial awareness state and perception state at the age of 5 or 6, and entered the no-doubt state or even the see-through state at the age of 16 or 17. However, once they entered the see-through state, it was like falling into a swamp, and it was difficult for them to make any progress for decades. But eldest brother of the academy, who only entered the no-doubt state at the age of 30, was not talented or smart, and even seemed a little stupid. But he could understand the see-through state in 3 months, and the most terrifying thing was that he entered the see-through state and knowing destiny state in one day. This kind of creation was really incredible, and there might not be another person like him in the whole cultivation world. After a long time, second brother looked at Chen Pippi and said calmly, "Eldest brother is gentle and kind, and a real gentleman. He accumulated a lot of experience, and once he was enlightened, he soared to the sky. His accumulation is so deep that you and I can't reach it." Chen Pippi nodded repeatedly. He was in awe of second brother, who was strict and solemn, but both of them were extremely proud and congenial, so he knew some stories about second brother. Tonight was the first time that he knew that eldest brother, who was gentle and generous to his subordinates and respectful to his teacher, wore an old robe, held an old book, and tied a water ladle, and looked more like a servant of the academy, turned out to be such an extraordinary person. He could not help but nervously start to reflect on himself. In the 2 years before eldest brother traveled with his teacher, did he ever show off in front of eldest brother shamelessly? This chapter has 4,000 words, so it is more than 10 minutes late. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 130. Chen Pippi followed second brother across the stone platform and went up along another stone path in the mountain through the fog. It took him a long time to digest the shock that eldest brother gave him, and then he couldn't help but think about the first question. Second brother used 15 days to break through 3 states, I used 17 days, and Ning Ke only used 14 or 15 days. Is he really the same as us? Or did he start to meditate hard from the day he was born, and the psyche power was stored in his brain? Now he changed his fate and opened his acupoints, and the psyche power gushed out to help him break through 3 states. This time should be counted from the day he was born? But if so, eldest brother had held it for 16 or 17 years to enter the no-doubt state, and he was 16 or 17 years old this year. Why did it seem that he was also very great? Thinking of Ning Ke's shameless words in the old library, No one knows who will go further on this road in the future, and thinking of the faint echoes between eldest brother and second brother of the academy and himself, Churnpippi's fat body trembled slightly. He turned pale with fright and thought, what if that idiot surpasses me in the future? What will happen? Out of the 17 acupoints in the ocean of Qi and mountain of snow, 10 of them were opened. Even if his psyche power accumulated for 16 years was pure and thick, he could only play a dull, dry and unpleasant song. The breath of nature that he could control was too weak. As long as he couldn't enter the knowing destiny state, even if he reached the top of the see-through state, he could only make paper flowers fluttering in the sky, perform magic tricks, or steal some silver ingots from the official warehouse. How could he catch up with me? Oh, poor Ninquebec! Even if you set foot on the road of cultivation, with your small body and the trickle-like breath of nature that you can control, you will still be beaten. Having figured this out, Churnpippi was greatly relieved. He smiled and thought that he still had to remind that guy in the future. Otherwise, he would really think that he was a genius in cultivation and play around. It would not be good if he was killed by a real powerhouse. The two of them walked to the front of the residence. Before second brother left, he suddenly asked, "Did it really only take 14 days?" Churnpippi lowered his head and counted seriously with his fingers. He thought of the night when he saw Ning Ke dying. He did not know if he should calculate the Acupore's connection at that time or earlier or after he fed him the heavenly power pill. The key was when his snow mountain would be rebuilt. He raised his head and said respectfully, it could be 14 days or 15 days. If he woke up in the morning, then it should be 15.5 days. It should be around today. Second brother stared into his eyes seriously and said, "Younger brother, how can a man live his life in a muddle-headed manner? You should know that rigor is a necessary cultivation in life. 4 is 4, 5 is 5. You can't use almost as an excuse. Go and figure out how many days it took for that guy to break through the third realm. This is also my test for you." After saying this, he tucked his thumbs into his golden silk belt, held his waist, and walked slowly and solemnly to his residence. In the darkness of the night, a faint voice could be heard. "I knew it, it can't be 14 days. Even though Ning Ke could recite the article on the response of the Tao fluently and meditate all the time in the city of Wei, even though Liu Qingchun had told him many things during the journey, and even though he had communicated with Churnpippi many times in the old library, Ning Ke's understanding of the cultivation world was still pitiful. He did not understand why he could cultivate all of a sudden, nor did he know what state he was in. He was still in a muddle-headed state. He did not know that his speed of cultivation had once troubled Churnpippi and even second brother of the academy. He thought that being able to perceive the breath of heaven and earth and then other things was a natural development after stepping on the road of cultivation. He thought that he was just like those cultivators in Taoist and Buddhist temples deep in the mountains, and there was nothing special about him. The life in the academy and the attitude of his classmates in the study room also gave him a strong psychological hint. As time went by, the aftermath caused by the semester exam gradually dissipated, but it really began to show its effect. Not many people would gather at the corner of the alley or by the window, pointing at him from afar. No one was willing to pay attention to him anymore. He basically didn't participate in the 4 subjects of archery, driving, mathematics, and music. He didn't need to study the first 3 subjects, and he didn't need to study the music subject because it was useless to study it. Therefore, he didn't have a term exam, and naturally, he didn't have any chance to avenge the slander he had suffered before. The academy was a group, and the group consciousness moved blindly and persisted. It was inconvenient for the students to mock Ning Ke face to face, so they learned to deliberately ignore him. When they saw him in an excited discussion, they would indifferently stop talking. When there was a gathering, they would not ask him to go with them. Gradually, there was an invisible barrier between them. Because of this invisible barrier, Those classmates who originally believed in him could not go against the will of the masses and get close to him again. Chu Yoxian's attitude towards him was the same as usual. But because Ning Ke often stayed at the old library and young Master Chu often played truant, they did not see each other much. As for Situilan, she knew that His Highness appreciated Ning Ke, so she believed that Ning Ke did not lie about his illness to avoid the exam. But she could not say too much for him in this atmosphere. Ning Ke's temperament would not allow him to humble himself and beg others to get close to him. Since no one was willing to pay attention to him, he would quickly leave the study room when he heard the bell, go to the kitchen to get some food and go around the pond to read books in the old library. As a result, he had less and less time to contact his classmates, and they became more and more strangers. In this way, the soldier from the border town who had shocked everyone with 3 A+ grades in the academy entrance exam, the desperate student who forced Xie Qingyun to vomit blood when he entered the second floor, and the handsome lad who had a great reputation in the House of Red Sleeves gradually faded into the crowd. To be more precise, he had become a person forgotten by the academy. Now, the topic of young students in the academy focused on the exquisite essay written by Lin Chuan Wang Ying, the beautiful poem written by Zhong Dajuan, the student in the course of magic skills named Chen Ximiao who broke through the perception state the day before yesterday, a student recommended by the military ministry in dormitory B beat the instructor in the course of toxicology yesterday, and Miss Situ scolded Chu Zhongtian again. The outstanding talent from the South Jin Kingdom, Xie Qingyun, was naturally the focus of countless people in the academy. After getting 5 A+ grades in the semester exam, he contributed 2 shocking topics to the academy. One was that someone saw him snuggling with Jean Wucai, the granddaughter of the Tang Libation, on a stone bench by the wetland on a night in late summer. The other was the news from the course of magic skills that Xie Qingyun had finally broken through the perception state and successfully entered the no-doubt state. Professor Chao Jifeng commented with satisfaction after personally checking him, saying that the boy had a greater chance to enter the second floor next spring. The days passed by peacefully. A cool breeze blew down a few yellowish leaves. Autumn finally arrived. Ning Ke, dressed in the autumn uniform of the academy, walked out of the kitchen with his head down and walked towards the old library. When he was about to pass through the alley of the academy building complex to the wetland, he found a group of people talking together in front of him. The heroic male student in the middle seemed to be the center of the group. Ning Ke remembered that the young male student was called Chang Jingming, who came from the Yulin Royal Guards and was also recommended by the military ministry like himself. He had faintly heard some classmates' discussion. It was this person who hit 10 targets in a row in the course of toxicology and beat the instructor once. Now he was also in the limelight in the academy. Ning Ke directly walked past the edge of the crowd. He did not expect that after he passed by, Chang Jingming's expression became serious and said in a low voice, "Ning Ke, we are all recommended students by the military ministry. Do you want to muddle along like this? It's not something we, the Tang army, would do." Ning Ke stopped and looked back at him. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, "Although we are all recommended students by the military ministry, once we enter the academy, we'd better not call ourselves Tang soldiers. And I believe that no one dares to spit on my face. As for muddle-headedness, it's just your opinion and has nothing to do with me." Chang Jingming frowned and said, "If you want to prove yourself again, you should not give up the opportunity to prove yourself. As long as you are willing to participate in the course of toxicology, I am willing to give you a chance to challenge me. Is this a charity?" Ning Ke looked at him and shook his head. He said, "It seems that you don't know what I said to Xie Qingyun and the others in the study room that day. I am not a flower in a greenhouse. I don't need some wind and drizzle to prove my perseverance and ability. When you were guarding the palace in the Yulin Royal Guards, I was guarding the frontier fortress. The military ministry recorded how many horse gang heads I beheaded. I don't need to rely on other things to prove myself. After saying this, he turned around and left. Chang Jingming looked at Ning Kei's back with an extremely ugly expression. Ning Kei's refusal to take the exam on the pretext of illness made the recommended students of the military ministry feel ashamed. The Tang army cared more about glory than life. Chang Jingming really could not understand what Ning Kei was thinking. Walking out of the lane to the wetland, Ning Kei noticed that there were 2 female students under the tree, pointing at the lake and smiling. However, the slender girl's smile was obviously a little forced, and there was a touch of envy and sadness in her eyes. Chu Yuxian had told him that this girl had an uncle in the palace, and few people in the academy dared to provoke her. He could not help but feel a little surprised, wondering what could make her so complicated by the lake. Following their eyes, wild ducks were swimming peacefully among the green grass of the shallow lake. Not far away, a young man and a young woman stood side by the lake. The young man was handsome and had an extraordinary bearing. It was Xie Qingyun. The young woman was gentle and beautiful. It was Jin Wucai. The two stood by the lake and whispered from time to time, looking at the center of the lake with a smile. A gust of early autumn wind blew the corner of the academy uniform and skirt, which was really pleasing to the eye and floating like fairies. The enviable immortal couple on the campus, the slightly sour affection of the girl watching from afar, Ning Kei quietly looked at the people by the lake, and those who looked at the people by the lake, smiled and shook his head, and left again. These days, his mood was getting calmer and calmer. He was indifferent to the neglect and exclusion of the academy classmates, and even enjoyed the peace, because his mentality had changed fundamentally from the previous 16 years. After going through many hardships, he finally set foot on the road of cultivation and saw a more exquisite and broader new world. Compared with it, the love and hate in the secular world naturally became much more indifferent. Since he had already set foot on the road, he was sure that he could go far, far. Those hidden towers, those mountains, and those seemingly powerful and indestructible enemies would become the scenery on the road as time went by. In this case, how could he not be calm? There was no lack of beauty in the world, and there was no lack of eyes to discover beauty. But only with a calm enough sight could one discover the beauty that could not be discovered before. In Ning Kei's eyes, the scenery of the couple by the lake was very beautiful, even if that man was Xie Qingyun. In his eyes, the scenery of the academy was very beautiful, even if the academy was about to forget him. These days, in addition to reading and cultivating in the old library, he spent a lot of time walking alone in the academy because he was excluded by other students. In the eyes of others, his figure was a little lonely and pitiful, but only he himself knew that the academy was really beautiful when he was alone, especially those places that only he knew. Walking along the stone path beside the wetland and bypassing the old library to the direction of the mountain, Ning Kei found a large untrodden lawn behind a row of dense trees. In the center of the lawn there were many unknown trees. Those trees were tall and steep. Not knowing whether it was because of the strong wind in the mountain, most of the trees were smooth, with only a few sparse branches sticking out at the top. Hundreds of tall trees gathered together looked like countless huge wooden swords inserted in the center of the lawn, densely packed, extremely amazing, and could be called a magnificent scene. Walking into the woods, Ning Kei randomly chose a tree and sat down. Leaning against the smooth and slightly protruding trunk, he took out a handwritten notebook from his arms and began to read it attentively. The notebook was the first part of the brief introduction to the 5 states of cultivation. A few days ago, he finally succeeded in using the 8 strokes calligraphy of Yong to deconstruct and reorganize the classics in the old library. Being able to temporarily remember those words in his mind, he naturally made a copy for himself without hesitation. This forest was very far from the academy and separated from the wetland by 2 dense forests and 2 large lawns. On weekdays, few people came here, so he did not worry about being seen by others. He frowned and carefully read the words on the handwritten notebook. After a long silence, he murmured, "I can float pieces of paper, move candlelight, and move silver ingots. Have I also entered the no-doubt state? I heard that Xie Qingyun also just entered the no-doubt state. Then why are these little kids so excited?" At this moment, a gentle and quiet voice sounded behind him. "Xie Qingyun is less than 20 years old. It's really not easy for him to enter the no-doubt state from the perception state. It's reasonable for the students in the front yard to be happy for him. As for you, you have a lot of adventures. Pippi is kind and willing to help you, so it's reasonable for you to enter the no-doubt state." Ning Ke was suddenly shocked. Then he calmed down after hearing the voice. He hurriedly got up, patted off the grass on his buttocks, and bowed respectfully to the female professor beside the tree behind him. He said, "It's you." The female professor walked out from behind the tree. She had a petite figure and a youthful face, but she exuded a gentle and mature aura. The contrast between her appearance and her temperament made it impossible to tell how old she was, which made her even more charming. She looked at the lad and sighed. "I've been practicing regular script in the old library for 20 years, and you've been bothering me every day. I like this unyielding sword forest the most in the academy. But now you appear here again, which really gives me a headache." Ning Ke looked at the female professor, whom he had known for half a year but still did not know her name. His eyes suddenly turned. "Don't think that every encounter is an adventure." The female professor looked at him and said with a smile, "I won't teach you anything. If you really need me to teach you in the future, I will teach you without you asking." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 131. Ning Ke was embarrassed that the female professor had seen through his thoughts. He touched his head and smiled. The female professor looked at him and said with a smile, "You don't have to avoid me. I just come to this forest occasionally." Ning Ke asked respectfully, "Miss, why do you like this forest?" The female professor was silent for a while. She put her hands behind her back and looked up at the autumn leaves in the forest. She said indifferently, "Many years ago, someone was enlightened in this forest. He was the only person I truly admired in the academy. Maybe some aura of that person is still left in this forest. That's why I feel a little happy every time I come here." "The only person you truly admired?" Ning Ke was confused and asked, "Is it the headmaster who was enlightened here?" The female professor smiled and said nothing. Ning Ke looked at her back and suddenly found that the slender female professor was looking at the sky with her hands behind her back. She looked magnificent. He scratched his head and said, "If that senior was still in the forest, you might become friends with him." The female professor shook her head and said softly, "If I could meet him, I'd like to see if his sword aura is really that magnificent." Hearing the words, magnificent, Ning Ke thought of the Howren sword in the old library for no reason. But he still had no clue. There is a gist of trueness in the forest. Since you can understand the scenery here, don't waste it. Look around. The female professor looked back at him and said, "Cultivators don't want to compete with others. But you can't go astray by reading and admiring the scenery. How can you show your ambition by being indifferent? Next autumn, the Tangs in your batch will go to the frontier fortress to practice. You should lay a solid foundation in this year. Otherwise, it will be a pity if you die on the battlefield." Ning Ke sincerely bowed to accept the advice. Suddenly he thought of the word she said and asked curiously, "You're not a Tangs?" The female professor shook her head and walked out of the forest gently. Ning Ke looked at her beautiful back and asked, "Miss, I still don't know your name." "My name is Yulian." "Yulian?" It was an ordinary and even tacky name. Ning Ke wondered how such a dignified academy professor could have such a name. He suddenly thought of the question he had been having these days, and could not help but pluck up the courage to ask loudly, "Sir, may I know how old you are?" Julien smiled. She did not stop or look back. She said softly at the edge of the woods, "If I remember correctly, it's very impolite to ask a woman her age." Looking at the disappearing figure of the female professor outside the forest, Ning Ke laughed at himself and thought, "If it weren't for the fact that you look like a 16-year-old and your gentle and graceful temperament like a 30-year-old, how would I have thought of asking this question?" The autumn scenery was beautiful. The sky was high and the clouds were light, making people feel relaxed and happy. The forest was dyed red by the blush on the young girl's face, and the morning frost cleared the dusty hearts of the people. Ning Ke studied and cultivated in the academy calmly. He was not as eager as before and gradually understood the world of cultivation. He patiently tried to concentrate his psyche and became intimate with the candlelight, paper and silver ingots. He was not in a hurry to find his natal item. Occasionally, he chatted with Chu Yuxian, discussed math problems with Situ Ilan in a corner where the academy students could not notice, and derogated with Chun Pippi by leaving messages. Occasionally, he brought 2 bowls of crab porridge to talk with Chun Pippi. There was no hatred or blood, only learning and waiting. He waited for his strength to slowly improve and his enemies to gradually relax and grow old. He waited for the arrival of winter in autumn. After winter came spring. In spring, the second floor of the academy would start to accept students, and he would return to the frontier fortress in the autumn of next year. After killing people with a hatchet at the age of 4, he finally had time to live, not just to survive. In his memories, except for the absence of Sang Sang, this period of time in the academy could even be said to be the most peaceful and happy days of his life. The mountains at the border of the Tang Empire and the Yen Kingdom also welcomed autumn. The troops stationed between the valleys and the plains of the 2 countries could not feel any peace and happiness. Although there had been no major war for many years, it was a hard job to be stationed at the border. This place was located in the north, and once autumn came, the temperature dropped sharply. Everyone's hands were frozen red. Looking at the bleak scene of falling leaves, they did not have the mood to enjoy the autumn scenery. In the early morning, 2 men dressed in the Yen Kingdom crossed the border and walked into the Tang military camp. This was the place where the Tang Empire's most valiant border troops were stationed. It was also the place where the main tent of the general of the army was located. The defense inspection was extremely strict. The 2 middle-aged men had the handprint of the secret agent issued by the military ministry, and it took them a long time to pass through the layers of inspection in the military camp. Walking into the intelligence division's room in the camp, the younger of the 2 turned around to look at the grand central tent not far away. His gaze landed on the fluttering military flag at the top of the tent, and a cold glint flashed through his eyes. After entering the tent and making sure that no one was eavesdropping, the other middle-aged man looked at his companion coldly and scolded in a low voice. The imperial court sacrificed a lot to get the secret agent's handprint from the Tang military ministry from Chang'an City. Today's assassination can only succeed, and there is no room for failure. Be careful, you should not have looked at the side. The young Yen man's face was full of disdain, and he said, "It's just a butcher's ear. Do you think I can make him feel that someone wants to assassinate me just by looking at him from afar? There are countless people in the world who want to kill the butcher, but he is still alive." The middle-aged Yen man looked at him coldly and said, "The distance from here to the main tent has been accurately calculated by the Privy Council, and it is enough for us to launch a sneak attack. But have you ever thought that if we can sneak attack him, he can also sense our presence? Don't be too careful," the young Yen man said unhappily. At this moment, the middle-aged Yen man's expression changed dramatically, and he looked out of the tent in disbelief. Although this place was not too far from the nearest state capital of Liang State, Due to the strict military discipline of the Tang Empire, the border with the Yen Kingdom was even more tightly guarded. This time, before the midwinter arrived, the army was pressuring the border to intimidate the enemy, so no officer dared to return to the state capital without permission. Tens of thousands of tents were set up by the border soldiers, and among them, the tent that was as majestic as a hill, with the military flag fluttering on it, was naturally the main tent of the tens of thousands of border soldiers. There were no soldiers patrolling outside the tent, and it was as quiet as the back garden of a noble's mansion in Chang'an City. The light inside the tent was extremely dim, and a wind-proof oil lamp was hanging on the tent wall, gently illuminating the bed covered with expensive furs. A middle-aged man was lying between dozens of expensive furs. The man was wearing a plain undergarment, and his eyebrows were as thick as black silkworms, and his lips were as red as thick blood. Under the thin clothes, his burly body was like steel, and even in a deep sleep, there was a murderous intent. The middle-aged man seemed to have sensed something, and opened his eyes to look out of the tent. His face was indifferent, and his eyes were like lightning. There is only one day left, let's all work hard. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 132. The middle-aged Yen man did not see the two lightning-like eyes in the tent far away. However, as the most powerful Psyche master living in seclusion in the west of Yen, he was extremely sensitive to the fluctuations of the qi of heaven and earth. Instantly, he felt as if there was a coldness coming from the deepest part of the earth, penetrating the tent and invading his body. His expression changed drastically. With a muffled grunt, he made the first move. His skinny hands spread out in front of his chest and abdomen, forming a mudra. His palms were mottled with blood, like two bright red wintersweet flowers in late winter. Psyche power gushed out through the air. The air in the tent far away was drawn by this surge of Psyche power and suddenly rolled up like a storm. The middle-aged general who was sitting quietly among the dozens of expensive furs frowned slightly. The expensive fur under his body split open and rolled up as if it had a life of its own. The leather of the bed-sheet was torn into ropes by the violent Psyche power. They swayed like snakes and instantly bound his body, making him sink deeper and deeper. These seemingly terrifying ropes were actually unable to bind the middle-aged man at all. What was truly effective was the thick qi of heaven and earth that was attached to these ropes, as well as the formless and powerful mental power. The young man was a great sword master who had just become famous in the Yen Kingdom. Before the age of 30, he had stepped into the middle grade of see-through. He could be called a cultivation genius, so it was inevitable that he was proud. However, looking at his companions beside him, who looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy, he knew that his side had already been discovered by the enemy. Thinking of the enemy's violent and powerful reputation, he did not dare to be careless. His eyebrows were like swords, and he bit the tip of his tongue to spit out a mouthful of blood. His fingers pinched the sword formula and the blood came out. He used all his cultivation in one move. The flying sword hidden in the sheath beside him was unsheathed with a clang. With a flash of light, it turned into a silver dragon and tore through the tent in front of him. It pierced through the darkness that shrouded the military camp before dawn and pierced into the flickering tent of the central military. The middle-aged man in the tent looked indifferent. He let the ropes and leather, which contained the vigorous qi of heaven and earth, bind his body with the invisible and powerful Psyche power, and let the torn expensive furs flutter in the air around him. His steel-like body under the thin clothes showed no sign of moving. He frowned as he stared at the whistling flying sword. He looked at the untraceable and unfathomable sword shadow that was as powerful as a flying dragon. Suddenly, he frowned and revealed an extremely disdainful and indifferent smile. those ropes that contained the chi of heaven and earth, and those invisible mental powers had shrunk the thin underwear of the middle-aged man into pieces. The dragon-like flying sword had already reached less than 3 feet in front of him, whistling shrilly. In the next moment, it was about to pierce into the space between his eyebrows. The situation was extremely dangerous. At this moment, the middle-aged man's sculpted lips tightened. With some boredom, some contempt, and some tiredness, he casually said a word, "Break." The word "break" came out of his lips. It was clear and thick, but not very loud. However, just as the sound reverberated in the tent, the slowly flowing black clouds above the military camp suddenly sped up. A gray sky shone on the ground, and the clouds exploded with a loud thunder. Boom! No one knew whether the thunder came from the clouds or from the indifferent lips of the middle-aged man. It roared and instantly occupied all the space in the Tang military camp. An irresistible presence shrouded the wilderness. The flying sword that had pierced into the tent suddenly trembled, as if it had been hit by an invisible hammer. It trembled and let out a wail, struggling to turn around and escape. However, the middle-aged man's eyes were like lightning, and his words were like thunder. What in the world could be faster and stronger than lightning? With a faint cracking sound, the flying sword that was as vigorous as a silver dragon a moment ago was directly smashed into scorched black iron pieces. In an instant it was broken into dozens of pieces that flew everywhere, piercing through the tent and disappearing into unknown places. The pieces of expensive fur flying in the air seemed to be immobilized. They suddenly floated quietly in the air. The ropes that tightly bound the middle-aged man broke inch by inch like a snake that had been cut by a sharp knife. They fell to the ground lifelessly and could no longer control him. This thunderous roar from the middle-aged man's lips did not end there. Instead, it continued to rumble through the military camp. The majestic and unparalleled power once again surged out. In the next moment, the majestic and sturdy central camp violently exploded like a leather bag that had been filled with too much wine. Countless fragments of the tent mixed with the contents of the tent and flew out. Then, a small tent next to the tent was overturned and exploded into pieces. The Tang bodyguard inside rubbed his eyes and looked at the high sky helplessly. Before he could figure out what had happened, he was frightened by the terrible explosion behind him and subconsciously crawled to the ground. One by one, the tents of the Tang army burst open and flew away. The thick soil on the border seemed to be blooming flowers. Starting from the ruins of the tent of the Tang army, it moved in a straight line to the south. Wherever the line pointed, whether it was tents or stables, they all collapsed in an instant. What was amazing was that the people and horses inside were not injured. In a flash, the majestic and powerful power came to the end of the line, which was the tent of the intelligence department where the 2 Yen people were hiding. The middle-aged man of Yen felt the power coming toward him and knew that the 2 of them had no time to react. He subconsciously looked at his young companion who was trembling beside him with pity, and then shook his head. The wind blew and the small tent was instantly torn apart. The neck of the middle-aged Psyche master from Yen she was suddenly broken. His shaking head was directly shaken off his body and exploded like a ripe watermelon. Only the horrible blood cavity was left and the body fell forward with blood splashing. The other young see-through strong man from Yen Kingdom had 2 streaks of blood in his desperate eyes. Then his whole body slowly collapsed like a sand sculpture blown by the wind, and became a horrible pool of flesh and blood on the ground. The warning bell rang hurriedly. The Tang border army responded with high efficiency and quickly strengthened the defense of the position. The cavalry on the left began to prepare their swords and horses and pressed forward towards the Yen territory. Deep in the camp, however, it was still orderly. The personal guards of the general in full armor walked among the ruins expressionlessly, looking for possible enemies. Suddenly, whether it was the personal guards who were looking for spies, the ordinary soldiers who were cleaning up the ruins of the tents, or the horsekeepers who were comforting the frightened military horses, they all stopped what they were doing at the same time. They stood straight and raised their right arms to their chest. They looked at the middle-aged man in awe and saluted in unison. General Xiahou. The sound of steady footsteps rang out in the barracks as the middle-aged man indifferently walked over. At this moment, he was already wearing a set of shining armor. One could faintly see some kind of indecipherable rune inscribed on the armor. These black lines of rune inscriptions did not dilute the killing intent of the armor. Instead, they added an indescribable sense of power to the armor. He was one of the 4 generals with the most power in the Tang military. He was the great general of the army, Xiahou. General Xiahou was a strong man at the peak of martial cultivation in the world. His muscles and bones were like steel. Coupled with his ice-cold expression, ruthless and cruel military methods, and fearless military style, he was invincible in the north of the continent for 24 years. He helped the empire to open up new land and intimidated the enemies. He was highly regarded by the imperial court and respected by his subordinates. It seemed that they had paid a great price and invested a great deal of effort and expectations. The situation at that time also seemed extremely dangerous. But in fact, compared with General Xiahou's unparalleled strength, this assassination was more like a desperate suicide. Listening to this seemingly brainless analysis, Gu Shi admired in admiration and said, "The general is really clever. This year is the day when the crown prince of the Yan kingdom returns home. Whether the assassination is successful or not, His Majesty will definitely be furious. If the general writes another letter, I'm afraid that the crown prince can only continue to live in Chang'an City as a duke." General Xiahou said expressionlessly, "How can I follow the wishes of those Yan kingdom people? Send an order to the army not to mention this assassination. Later, I will write a secret letter to His Majesty to explain the whole matter. It is not so easy to keep Prince Longqing, whom you Yan people have pinned the hope of restoring your country, in the country. Prince Longqing may not be willing to stay in the Yan kingdom." Gu Shi thought of the news from the military ministry the day before and said with a smile, "Being able to enter the second floor of the academy to study with the headmaster of the academy is not necessarily worse than being a substitute crown prince." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 133. There is a mistake in the previous article. Xiahou is not the Defender General of the state, but the Defender General of the army. Report it to me first, and I will correct it immediately. Chapter 3 before 6. The morning light turned from dim to bright. General Xiahou walked to the eastern front line expressionlessly. Gu Shi and a team of personal guards followed him silently. The light of the rising sun shone on his armor, emitting a faint white luster. He looked like a mighty statue of God standing in the holy light. Xiahou walked into the temporary middle military camp tent and listened to his subordinate report the result of the cavalry of the left vanguard breaking into the Yan territory in the morning. After a long silence, he raised his head and said, "Kill 300 Yan prisoners of war as punishment." At this time, there was no one else in the tent except him and Gu Shi. Gu Shi looked at him and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He advised, "General, you decided to hide the assassination and only sent a secret letter to His Majesty. If you kill prisoners of war in front of the battle, I am afraid it will be difficult to hide it. What's more, those Yan people will definitely take the initiative to publicize it." Xiahou said indifferently, "The Yan army entered the country and harmed the old and weak people of our Tang Empire. They burned our villages. It is reasonable to kill 300 prisoners of war. I don't believe that anyone dares to say anything." Gu Shi was silent for a moment and said, "But it is not auspicious to kill prisoners of war." His Majesty will not like it. Xiahou took off his helmet and put it aside. He quietly looked at this loyal subordinate who had accompanied him for more than 20 years and said, "You should know very well that His Majesty has never liked me. The reason I'm still alive today is because I've made immortal contributions to the Empire. Our Tang Empire has always been clear about rewards and punishments. As long as I can continue to make contributions and the officials in the court can't catch me, His Majesty will not easily hurt me. In this way, it doesn't matter whether His Majesty likes me or not. Besides, if His Majesty likes me too much, I really don't know what to do." This paragraph, especially the last sentence, contained some meaning that only the two of them could understand. After a moment of silence, Gu Shi was about to say something when a horizontal line embroidered with gold thread on his cuff suddenly lit up. "Go," Xiahou said. Gu Shi bowed silently with his hands folded in front of his chest and then left the tent. There was no one in the tent. A self-mocking and slightly bitter smile appeared on Xiahou's face. He said softly, "I am so lucky to have met such a benevolent king like your Majesty. Otherwise, I don't know how many times I would have died. A gentleman can be deceived with methods, but can I deceive your Majesty with benevolence? It's just that the sovereign king cares about old times, cares about that layer of friendship that no one knows about, and has allowed me to live for these few more years." After a while, Gu Shi lifted the curtain and came back, holding a sealed letter in his hand. He walked to Xiahou and said softly, "The military ministry sent a letter with a talisman. Recently, Chang'an City has not been peaceful. I heard that there was a murder case in Southern City, which even alarmed the Yulin royal guards." Xiahou sneered. The officials in the imperial court took advantage of His Majesty's leniency and even dared to kill my subordinates. Haven't they learned to behave themselves in front of His Majesty after suffering such a big loss from Cao Shaoshu a few days ago? It really has nothing to do with the officials in the imperial court. Gu Shi shook his head and replied, "A master of see-through realm died in the murder case in Southern City, and that person used to be a former officer of the military ministry. That's why these disturbances were caused." Xiahou's eyes gradually condensed. He squinted at him and said, "Go on. I don't know if the general still remembers this person. His name is Yan Suqing. He used to be a document appraiser of the military ministry, but few people know that he was a great sword master." Speaking of this, Gu Shi took a deep look at the general and continued, "This person should have been enlightened and learned swordsmanship in the Haotian Divine Palace in West Hill. After being expelled from the military ministry because of that year's matter, he had been living peacefully with a tea merchant in Chang'an City. I didn't expect that he would die a violent death in the end." The atmosphere in the tent gradually became serious and cold, and the candlelight in the corner swayed uneasily. After a long time of silence, General Xiahou asked indifferently, "In the 13th year of Tianqi era, how many has it been?" Gu Shi replied softly, "Censor Zhang Yiqi died in a car crash. Former Xianwei general's subordinate Chen Zixian died violently in Eastern City, and this Yan Suqing was beheaded. This is the third death this year." The people of the Tang Empire were simple and firm. Chang'an City had a large population. Although the public security was excellent, there might be 1 or 2 abnormal deaths every day. The third death mentioned by the two people in the tent at this time naturally did not refer to the number of abnormal deaths in the 13th year of Tianqi era, but the deaths related to those past events. If Her Majesty hadn't stopped the birthday banquet this year and allocated some spare money to the military ministry wouldn't have thought of looking for veterans to send condolences, and wouldn't have found that Chen Zixian, who had long been forgotten, had died suddenly. Gu Shi looked at Xiahou and said softly, "Now Yan Suqing has also been beheaded, and the method is very similar. If we can confirm that the so-called accident of Censor Zhang Yiqi is also a murder, then we can find the truth of the matter. Not everything has the truth. General Xiaohou said indifferently, the people who should die in the two cases are all dead. Who will remember these things? Gu Shi replied, when fishermen cast their fishing nets, they always think that they can catch them all, but in fact, every time the fishing nets come out of the water, there are always a few fish that slip through the net. In my notes, there are at least 11 people alive in the Xianwei general's mansion. General Xiaohou slowly closed his eyes and said, those who can survive are some short-term handymen, who can't be beheaded according to the law of the Tang Empire. But all the servants and maids who have a contract with them are all dead. I don't believe that those short-term handymen who have nothing to do with the main family dare to hate the imperial court and still want revenge after so many years of forbearance. We still have to check it, Gu Shi said worriedly. At least as I said before, we should send someone to see if there is anything strange about the death of Censor Zhang Yiqi. I don't believe that there are still victims left in the two cases, but I am worried that the repeated killings are used by a noble in the palace to make trouble and establish power. Xiaohou replied indifferently, the princes are still young, and the fourth princess is just a silly girl. If His Majesty wanted to bypass the law to deal with me, he would have sent someone to directly cut off my head 10 years ago. There is no need to use these trivial means. But there is still a noble in the palace. Gu Shi glanced at his face and said cautiously. As expected, upon hearing these words, General Xiaohou's expression suddenly turned cold. He coldly stared at him and said, 20 years ago, when you swore an oath to follow me, I warned you that as long as I was alive, as long as I had a breath left, you were not to mention that noble person in front of anyone. Have you forgotten? Gu Shi bowed his head deeply and sincerely begged for forgiveness. But deep in his heart, there was a very tired and helpless sigh. He thought, General, you don't want the world to know the relationship between you and that noble also doesn't want the world to know. It's just that you chose to stay away from Chang and keep silent. But who can be sure that the noble will not use some more extreme and cruel methods? As the saying goes, once one enters the palace, one's heart is as hard as iron. Xiaohou looked at his subordinate who was begging for forgiveness in front of him. He thought of his loyalty over the years and the fact that he had been hard to ferry between the two banks of the turbulent river with him all these years. Xiaohou's face became slightly relaxed and he said in a low voice, but you are right. We must investigate the things in Chang'an City. Send a psyche practitioner back. After a short pause, he added expressionlessly, warn those who handle it. Even if they find out something, they are forbidden to act on their own. All the evidence should be submitted to the military ministry and the Chang'an local government. After all, the investigation is the imperial court's business. Gu Shi took the order and left. There was no one in the tent. Xiaohou took off his heavy armor and then sat on the couch. He silently looked at the faint candlelight that was about to be swallowed by the skylight outside the tent, motionless like a statue. His face was a little pale. The previous thunderous roar directly killed 2 cultivation powerhouses. That scene was so powerful, but no one knew that his body was still a little injured. As a powerhouse at the peak of martial arts in the world, his combat power was unparalleled. As long as he moved his mind, the vigorous qi of heaven and earth would condense on the surface of his body and connect inside and outside. The psyche power could not hurt him, and the flying sword could not break him. In fact, if he wanted to kill the 2 cultivation assassins from the Yen Kingdom, he could have chosen a simpler and harmless way to deal with them. But he was General Xiaohou, who was known for being ruthless, cold-blooded, and domineering. There were too many powerful enemies in the world. He had to maintain his invincible image in front of his enemies and his subordinates, so he had to choose the most arrogant and powerful way to deal with them. For this reason, he even did not hesitate to hurt his body and mind. If he did not want to be annoyed by the endless assassinations, He had to show his thunderous means and forcibly suppress the fighting desire of most of the enemies. This was probably the helplessness of many peerless powerhouses. The curtain was lifted, and a manservant walked in with a bowl of carefully prepared bird's nest and golden date porridge. The manservant looked handsome, and the porcelain bowl on the plate was exquisite and beautiful. It was obviously not an ordinary thing. General Xiahou took the bowl of porridge indifferently and drank it in one gulp. He waved his hand to signal the manservant to leave. He knew that the officials in Chang, and who were jealous of him, had been secretly saying that General Xiahou liked handsome manservants and had a special interest in bed. He was indifferent to this kind of rumor and was not angry at all, because both His Majesty and the places he was really afraid of were very clear about a fact. Since he cooked his most beloved concubine to death, he had never been close to a woman again, nor would he use any maidservant to serve him. When he cooked that concubine to death, it was a time when the censor's attacks were like a tide and the general's position was shaky. Those who thought they knew the inside story thought that he used the excuse of peeping into military affairs to cook his most beloved concubine to frighten a chief eunuch who was ordered to go to the military camp for questioning. However, only Xiahou himself knew that the chief eunuch who came to ask questions had nothing to do with the censor's memorials. What he was afraid of had nothing to do with the censors who had no strength to truss a chicken. It was a summer day. The night was short and the day was long. The light emitted by Haotian was not only warm but also blazing. A strict letter of inquiry from the West Hill Divine Kingdom was directly sent to the Chang, an imperial palace. Even the unknown place expressed serious concern. In the vast Min Mountain, not far from the military camp, countless sword lights could be vaguely seen. Shuang you shouldn't have performed the devil's dance that day. Xiahou stared at the porridge that was gradually freezing between his fingers. He thought that if it was still in the past, the gentlewoman he loved the most would have noticed it immediately. Then, she would have taken out a handkerchief to gently wipe it off for him. He could not help but shake his head and repeat expressionlessly, "You really shouldn't have performed that dance, although that dance and you when you were dancing were really beautiful." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 134. In a world full of Haotian's divine light, the skyscraping devil's dance should not have appeared. Facing the pressure of West Hill Taoism, especially that abbey, who can protect you? Your Majesty, the headmaster of the academy, the abbey dean, or that person? The former emperor was the Tang emperor. He only needed to say one word, and hundreds of thousands of cavalries would sweep the world and smash all the Taoist temples into scrap iron. He had the academy behind him, so he could ignore the Haotian divine light falling from the sky. But why would he turn against the West Hill Divine Kingdom for a saintess of the devil's doctrine? That person went to cultivate the 23-year cicada cultivation. I'm afraid that he has already forgotten you, his disciple, during the transformation. Then who can protect you? Me? But I'm just a general with brute force. I'm neither the headmaster of the academy nor the abbey dean. I don't have that kind of power. So I can only protect myself with your death. Because I need to survive, because there are more important people in my life waiting for me to protect. Many years later, in the military camp on the border between the Tang Empire and the Yen Kingdom, the general whose mane had long grown gray recalled the skyscraping devil's dance that had confused the three realms. There was no emotion on his face. It started from a letter sent by the hierarch of Haotian Taoism of the West Hill Divine Kingdom to the capital of Chang'an. In that letter, the hierarch of Haotian Taoism changed his attitude of getting along with the royal family of the Tang Empire on an equal footing and avoiding conflicts. He expressed extreme anger to the royal family on behalf of hundreds of millions of believers of Haotian Taoism. He severely accused a general of colluding with the remnants of the Devil's Doctrine and demanded an explanation from the royal family of the Tang Empire. At the same time that the letter was sent, 3 great divine priests of high status, who rarely left the West Hill Divine Kingdom, led countless masters of their sect to pass through Yanxi. They came to the vast Min Mountain, not far from the border of the Tang Empire. The warning they expressed was very strong. If the Tang Empire did not give the believers of Haotian Taoism an explanation, then Haotian Taoism would not mind taking the risk of falling out with the Tang Empire to kill the remnant of the Devil's Doctrine. Not many people knew about that storm. Before the Tang imperial family could react in time, General Xiahou cruelly cooked the beautiful woman to death. Haotian Taoism was very satisfied with the explanation given by the Tang Empire, and the Tang Empire avoided another war with the world because of the woman's death. The people of the Tang Empire would never be afraid of a war with the world, but no one would be willing to shed blood for a saintess of the Devil's Doctrine. Therefore, only a few people who knew the inside story had been guessing whether the Tang Emperor's benevolence towards General Xiahou was to comfort him from the pain of losing his arm. This kind of speculation was not necessarily in line with the facts, but the truth of history was always hidden in the gutter at the door. If one wanted to see it, one would have to endure too much mud and stench, and no one would be willing to take the initiative to uncover it. Many years had passed in the blink of an eye. In the autumn of the 13th year of the Tianqi era of the Tang Empire, the former saintess of the Devil's Doctrine, Murong Linshuang, had become the poor nameless concubine who was cooked alive in the memories of the common people. And in this autumn, there was another letter written by the hierarch of Haotian from the West Hill Divine Kingdom to the capital of the Tang Empire, Chang'an. I haven't seen that letter, but I heard that my father was very angry at that time. He tore the letter into pieces and scattered them all over the palace. On one hand, he sent eunuch Chui to the Yen territory to ask Xiahou if it was true, and on the other hand, he secretly ordered the Defender General of the state Su Shi to secretly mobilize troops, ready to attack the West Hill Divine Kingdom once they turned hostile. Prince Li Peiyan of the Tang Empire looked at the letter in his hand and shook his head with a wry smile. The wrinkles at the corner of his eyes disappeared as soon as they appeared. He said angrily, "What on earth do those old Taoists want to do? Now they even ask me to deliver this letter to my brother." Although the tone is calm, Yen Suqing's death is after all the internal affairs of the empire. Even if he used to be a disciple of your West Hill, there is no reason for him to send a letter to ask about it. How can my brother not be angry? A steward of the prince's mansion stood behind him obediently and said with a smile, "Everyone knows that His Majesty doesn't like those Taoists of West Hill. The hierarch of Haotian is also the most honorable person in the world. He probably doesn't want to directly deliver a letter to His Majesty, only to be directly slapped in the face by His Majesty. That's why he asks Your Highness to deliver it." As soon as he finished speaking, the steward immediately said respectfully, "In this world, only you are qualified to mediate between His Majesty and the hierarch of Haotian." "Humph, do I want to be the messenger?" Li Peiyan sneered and said, "In the first year of Tianqi era, my brother had just ascended the throne and was inspecting the great swamp in the south. He asked me to stay in the capital city of Chang and to supervise the country. I was young and impulsive at that time, and I really believed the West Hill swindlers. As a result, my brother was very angry after that, and it took many years to ease the relationship." Everyone knew that the imperial family of the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace were at loggerheads in the secular world and the West Hill Divine Palace. But this prince could be regarded as an exception. He not only had a good relationship with the South School of Haotian in the Tang Empire, but also had occasional correspondence with the West Hill Divine Palace. The communication between the two sides started from a certain cooperation in the first year of Tianqi era. The steward looked at the prince's slightly frowning eyebrows and thought that he had served His Highness for so many years, but still could not understand why His Highness would risk His Majesty's displeasure to befriend the Westhill Divine Palace. He never dared to ask about this matter. But at this time, seeing His Highness holding the letter written by the hierarch of Hautian in a daze, he finally made up his mind. Looking out of the window, he summoned up his courage and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, there is strong support from the outside, and we will be safe inside." Hearing this, Li Peiyan was slightly startled. Then he looked at the steward who had followed him since he was a child with a faint smile. Suddenly he reached out and patted the steward's shoulder and said in a gentle voice, "You are indeed worthy of being an old man in the mansion. You can see through my mind." After the steward left, the smile on Li Peiyan's face suddenly faded. He gently knocked on the copper bell beside the table and called a guard. After a moment of contemplation, he said in a cold voice, "There is something wrong with the steward. Inform the palace to send secret guards to keep an eye on him." "No, just kill him directly," Li Peiyan said in a deep voice. "How dare he provoke the relationship between me and my brother? This kind of person can't be left alive. Then inform the military ministry and ask them to investigate how the chief steward entered the prince's mansion when I left the palace. Focus on investigating whether he has any relationship with the Westhill." After arranging these matters, His Highness stayed alone in the study for a long time. He sat at the desk and recalled what happened that year. His straight and thick eyebrows slowly knitted together. Regarding the Xianwei general's mansion and the massacre in the Yan territory, he did not think that he did anything wrong, because he insisted that he did those things for the Tang Empire. Now the Tang Empire had countless cavalry generals, the academy and the headmaster of the academy. Even the Westhill Divine Kingdom did not dare to show any hostility. However, the Tang Empire had to survive for thousands of years. What if the national power weakened after a few generations? The headmaster of the academy would leave this world one day. What would happen then? What if the prophecy of the 7 tomes of arcane in the temple came true? In order to maintain a good relationship with the Hautian Taoism, whose believers were all over the world, so what if some unimportant people died? As long as the foundation of the Tang Empire was not affected, he did not care about those innocent people who died. He believed that his brother would not care either. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 135. In the early autumn, the Daming Palace in the north of Chang'an City stood peacefully among the dense ancient trees. After hundreds or even thousands of years of growth, these ancient trees were extremely thick and tall. But they still could not cover the magnificence of the palace group, nor could they suppress the solemn atmosphere of the world's political center. The most beautiful place in the palace was the Qingxi Hall. Looking from the back of the hall to the back of the mountain, one could see some withered leaves falling after a few autumn winds. The green color began to mix with bright yellow and light red, which was indescribably bright and moving. The Tang Emperor, Li Zhongyi, gently held the Empress's soft hand and looked at the early autumn scenery in the mountains in front of the hall. He sighed softly and said, "Trees can only reach the sky after 1,000 years of wind and rain. The Tang Empire has experienced countless wars and sacrificed countless famous generals, good ministers and warriors to achieve its current respected status. At that time, Pei Yan sacrificed the Tang people and even the generals for those Taoist priests from Westhill. I'm afraid he never thought that his actions would be so surprising in the eyes of those Taoist priests. If the Tang Empire can't resist the pressure of the outside world and casually sacrifice its ministers, then how can such a Tang Empire be qualified to shock the world? How can I not care as the Emperor of the Tang Empire?" The Empress handed the letter from Westhill back to him and gently snuggled up to him. Her beautiful eyes and brows were naturally charming and gentle. She comforted him in a low voice, "It's all in the past. Your Majesty, don't worry about it. The dead minister of the Tang Empire is still my minister. If he wasn't my brother, if not." The emperor looked at the empress with deep meaning and said, "How can I spare them?" The empress knew what he wanted to say next. She slowly stood up and calmly looked at the bright autumn mountains and old trees outside the railing. She said, "When your Majesty traveled far away to Nans, the prince received the letter from the hierarch of Hautian. I'm afraid he also felt it was a little tricky." After all, Jisho Abbey finally broke the silence and spoke. "Who in this world can be sure that the omen shown by the 7 tomes of arcane exist?" After a long silence, the emperor slowly replied, "When I was studying in the academy when I was young, the headmaster of the academy once taught me that I should acknowledge the existence of things that I temporarily do not understand. Because if you do not even understand the matters of the world, why bother thinking about those things in the underworld in vain? A legend is just a legend after all. When I ascended the throne, the 3 Empyrean wayfarers from the unknown place went to the wilderness, but they didn't find any clues. If the 7 tomes of arcane in the temple really had a clear prophecy, why couldn't they find it? Since that's the case, what happened afterward was just the reckless actions of those charlatans in a panic. As for what you said about my brother being frightened back then, it's indeed possible. But he still made the most fatal mistake. He grew up under my wings and was rarely exposed to wind and rain, so he couldn't clearly see that the Tang Empire could sweep the world, ignore the West Hill Divine Palace, and even ignore the pressure from Jisho Abbey and Xiankong Temple. Other than the strength of the country and the protection of the academy, more importantly, the Tang Empire never compromised. The emperor sometimes used I and sometimes I to refer to himself. That was because each of his words referred to a different direction. The empress quietly looked at his familiar profile and noticed that he deliberately did not mention the name of the first bureau. She said, "It's not that I want to speak for the prince. It's just that this matter involves too many people and he has no choice but to be cautious. Being cautious because of an illusory legend, and sacrificing the lives of innocent officials and people for a calamity that may or may not happen." The emperor slowly frowned and then laughed at himself. He sighed and said, "I can understand many people's difficulties and pressure. This is also the reason why I didn't touch them all these years." The empress lowered her head slightly and forcibly suppressed her emotions. She said softly, "I've made things difficult for your Majesty. I'm the ruler of the world. What's the big deal about bearing some criticism for my own woman?" The emperor laughed and took her into his arms. He raised his arm and pointed to the gradually dyed autumn mountains in front of the hall. He said, "Now there are many obstacles in this country. The Tang Empire's cavalry has rested for many years. If the 7 tomes of arcane in Jisho Abbey come true, it's not necessarily a bad thing. At that time, I'll lead tens of thousands of soldiers to push the Tang Empire to the other side of the world. At that time, I'll go with you to the White Bone Hall in the legend to see the autumn scenery again. I'll write an exquisite tribute to the ancestors of the Li family and fulfill the great wish of your sect for thousands of years." The empress looked at the man's familiar profile and thought of how he had doted on and protected her all these years. Her eyes were full of admiration and love. She said softly, "Your Majesty is so ambitious. I like it very much. It's said that the fish jumps into the sea. However, no matter how wide the sea is, there will always be a shore to restrain it. How can it accommodate the great wishes of the Empire and me for thousands of generations? So why can't our eyes fall on the higher, wider, and boundless sky?" When the Empress heard this, she thought of the scene that she often saw in the imperial study these days. She couldn't help but lift her sleeve to cover her mouth and chuckle. She rolled her eyes and added, "The flower blooms on the shore?" It seems that your Majesty really loves that piece of calligraphy. If so, in the future, if the Tang Empire can really open up its territory to the foreign world under your Majesty's leadership, you should ask the calligrapher to make a copy of it when you write a memorial to the ancestors of the empire. That day, I wanted to give the 5 words "the fish jumps into the sea" to Chow Xiaoshu. I didn't expect that guy to leave. At that time, I was inevitably a little upset. But at that time, I saw the last 5 words that the calligrapher added for me. The emperor bowed his head and kissed her gently on the face. He smiled and said, "These 5 words are enough to broaden the mind of an emperor. The calligrapher knows me very well. If I can find him, I must reward him heavily." The empress looked at him with interest and said with a smile, "If your Majesty finds that person, how do you want to reward him? Do you want to invite him into the Imperial Library to be a poet? In my opinion, I'm afraid that the calligrapher has guessed your Majesty's thoughts. He is not willing to be trapped in the CI Pavilion and live a mediocre life. That's why he refuses to show up." The emperor thought that there was indeed such a possibility and said angrily, "It's strange. I've asked a few grand secretaries in the court with that piece of calligraphy, but none of them could find any clues from the strokes. I've also sent many people to the big study rooms in Chang and to secretly search, but they still found nothing. I really don't know where that person is hiding now. When I think that person might be an official in the court who secretly teases me when he sees me in court every day, I'm full of complaints and can't wait to find him and behead him." Your Majesty looks at and appreciates the 5 words in the imperial study every day. It can be said that you really love it. If you really find that calligrapher, I don't believe that you are willing to cut off his head. The Empress said with a smile. "Today, no more. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 136. It's a pity that there are only 5 words. It's not satisfying enough. The emperor held his wife's hand and sighed with emotion. His face was full of regret. "Furthermore, other people don't dare to say it to my face. Don't you know that if we are talking about the level of appreciation and analysis, I still have it, but if we are talking about the skill of drawing and copying, it is a bit annoying. I tried using the double hook method last night and found that I couldn't copy the charm of those 5 words. The Empress smiled and suggested, "If your Majesty really likes it, why not let the ministers in the court who are good at calligraphy try?" The Emperor patted the back of her hand and laughed heartily. Shaking his head, he said, "It looks like you still understand my intentions. After the court meeting ended, I forced those old fellows to stay. At this moment, they are locked up in the royal study copying. I told them that regardless of whether their granddaughter is 1 year old or married, if they can't copy out the first 5 words, I will not let them go. For the sake of the 5 characters, flowers bloom on the shore of heaven, the Tang Imperial Palace added a lot of fun. However, no matter how much the Emperor loved this book, it was just for leisure. In order to avoid being nagged by the censors, the Emperor did not use the official agencies in the imperial court. He only sent people from the palace to look for it in the city of Chang'an. He also told some of the officials who were close to him and asked them to help him inquire among the people. Several months had passed. The most famous calligraphy shops in Chang'an had been searched, and the most famous calligraphers of the Tang Empire had been called to the palace to ask. But they still couldn't find the mysterious calligrapher. Even those famous calligraphers who had many students could not understand the style of the 5 word. The main reason for the current situation was still people's fixed thinking. From the Emperor of Tang to the old officials who were tricked into the imperial study to the great calligraphers among the common people, they were all amazed by the skillful use of the brush, the straight and broad structure, the enchanting and proud ink momentum, and the agile and elegant charm of the scroll. In their opinion, This mysterious calligrapher must be a reclusive master who had immersed himself in the art of calligraphy for decades. Even if a person with such a marvelous ability was hidden among the common people, he must be quietly cultivating in the bookstores of aristocratic families that had been passed down for hundreds of years. It was impossible for him to set up a stall on the street to sell calligraphy. It was precisely because of this preconceived idea that no one thought of going to the fragrance workshop to ask those poor scholars who sold their calligraphy, and no one thought of inquiring about whether there were any newly opened calligraphy shops in the slums. Naturally, no one could connect the piece of calligraphy that caused a disturbance in the Imperial Study with the unknown old brush pen shop on Lynn 47th Street. One day, several tourists from the Great River Kingdom came to Lynn 47th Street after visiting the Chang, an imperial palace, from afar. They casually strolled into the ordinary-looking calligraphy shop at the entrance of the street. They looked at the ordinary scrolls hanging on the wall with their hands behind their back. They could not help but frown and shake their heads. When they saw a painting, their eyes suddenly lit up and they exclaimed, "Chang and of the Tang Empire is really full of hidden talents. A random bookstore on the street can actually hide a very good ink scroll. Little girl, is your boss here?" Sang Sang was eating a bowl of chicken noodles. When she heard someone calling her, she raised her dark little face and answered with a smile, "Boss is not here. If you want to ask about the price, this painting is priced at 3,000 gold ingots, non-negotiable." An ordinary painting was priced at 3,000 gold ingots, and it was specifically stated that it was non-negotiable. What kind of style was this? This must be the style of the Great River Kingdom's sage of calligraphy, Mr. Wang, in his heyday. The tourists from the Great River Kingdom were startled when they heard this. They were so angry that they laughed. They did not bother to say anything else and left with a flick of their sleeves. It is said that the people of Chang are generous and hospitable. I think the people of Chang are so poor that they are crazy. As a certain person and a certain handmaiden had more and more silver notes on their waists, a certain person's ink scroll was getting more and more expensive, until it was unreasonably expensive. These days, the old brush pen shop could often see the shocked and speechless expressions of the customers, and could often hear the angry words of the customers before they left. Sang Sang was already familiar with this scene, and even a little numb. She lowered her head and continued to eat chicken noodles. Now she finally understood that although a bowl of chicken noodles could buy 6 bowls of hot and sour noodle slice soup, the chicken soup with drops of oil was really fragrant. Ning Kei came out of the back house, playing with 2 smooth silver balls made of silver ingot. He leaned against the door of the shop like a spoiled brat and looked at the back of the customers in the middle of the street. He did not feel that he was degrading the quality of the people of Chang, and said mockingly, "Don't ask about the price if you can't afford it, Sang Sang. Close the door, hot pot." Spring passed, autumn came, and winter arrived. It was now the deep winter of the 13th year of the Tang Empire's Tianqi era. Ning Kei and Sang Sang had been in Chang for almost a year. These days, he studied in the academy and was deliberately forgotten by his classmates, so he had more time to cultivate and chat with Chen Pippi. Sang Sang stayed at Lin 47th Street every day to look after the shop whose business was getting worse. Occasionally, she would accept Li Yu's invitation to visit the princess's mansion, and the two became more and more familiar. Ning Kei could not understand the growing friendship between Her Highness and the little handmaiden. In the end, he could only attribute it to fate. After eating a fragrant hot pot and splurging 4 plates of fresh-cut mutton, Ning Kei warmed his feet and snuggled into bed. Listening to the howling wind through the cracks of the window, he rubbed his slightly cold face and said angrily, "It hasn't snowed for a long time, why is the weather so cold? Chang is suffering in the summer? Who is the irresponsible person who made this conclusion?" Sang Sang smiled, took off her outer coat and snuggled into the other side of the bed. She rubbed her little hands that were cold and red from the washing water and said, "Young master, you should be content. Our life now is much better than when we were in the city of Wei." This was a very sincere comment. Now that the master and the handmaiden had more than 10,000 taels of silver under their bed, and they also received a large sum of dividends from the gambling house in the western city every month. In the subtext of their hearts it was, "We are not short of money now, too rich, too damn rich." Since they had so much money, they should use it to improve their lives. Although the master and the handmaiden still had the habit of being thrifty, it was easy to go from frugality to extravagance. The hot and sour sliced noodles were replaced by shredded chicken noodle soup, and the pickled vegetable porridge was replaced by hot mutton. It was so cold a few days ago that they even built a new Kong in the house. Now they were burning silver charcoal, drinking new tea, and the house was as warm as spring. Compared with their previous life of more than 10 years, the current life was simply wonderful. Ning Ke complained about the dry and cold winter in Chang'an, but he was just saying it. Now he could finally see the mysterious cultivation world, where he could use his psyche power to control the qi of heaven and earth, spin the silver ball in his hand, and lift the pieces of paper on the table at will. Well, because the psyche power that he could export out of his body was too weak, and the qi of heaven and earth that he could control was too thin, so the pieces of paper flew more disorderly than feathers, and the silver ball spun more slowly than Chun Pippi, but he really could not find any dissatisfaction. Outside the window, the north wind gradually tightened, and the night passed without a word. When they woke up the next morning, they saw endless white snow covering the streets, alleys, palaces, and buildings of Chang'an. Silver trees quietly poked out of the streets and looked at the pedestrians. Ning Ke put on a coat and stood side by side with Sang Sang at the door of the old brush pen shop. Looking at the beautiful scenery and thinking about his encounters and life in the past year, he actually saw a new meaning in the snow that he was tired of seeing in the city of Wei. "These days are really good," he praised contentedly. Sang Sang smiled and nodded beside him. They lived a peaceful and happy life in Chang'an City, without the blood of revenge and the depression of not being able to get what they wanted. They lived back and forth between the academy and the old brush pen shop. The master and the servant gradually grew up and were gradually forgotten by the people around them. Just like that, they willingly disappeared in these beautiful days. She did needlework and washed the dishes, while he wrote a scroll and looked at the books he copied from the old library. In this seemingly monotonous repetition, the hour hand began to turn again. Time slipped away peacefully. The winter solstice, the new year, and the lantern festival slipped away in the liveliness, and the mutton hot pot, hot tea, and ink slipped away in the silence. In the blink of an eye, it was another spring in the 14th year of the Tianqi era. Another spring arrived. The catkins were all over the sky. The plump figures of the Chang'an girls, who had been bound by cotton-padded jackets and fur coats for an entire winter, finally had a chance to breathe. Looking at those girls who shivered in the chilly early spring breeze, but wanted to open their chests to reveal their white and tender skin, Ning Ke lifted the curtains and went to the academy with a heart full of appreciation and gratitude. After nodding to Siduilan, who was sitting in the front row, he walked to his own table in the back. No other classmates would greet him or even look at him. He had long been accustomed to such indifference and disregard, so he did not care. After sitting down, he took out the lesson plan of etiquette and began to review it. This morning was the etiquette lesson. The etiquette instructor of classroom 3 of the academy was the associate professor of etiquette, Chao Jifeng. He was also the psyche master in the see-through state of Yen Kingdom, who had beaten the grandson of the general, Chu Zhongtian, into a pig's head on the first day of the academy. No one dared to slight such an experienced and famous teacher who was ruthless and had deep feelings for the Tang children. The bell rang quietly, and Associate Professor Chao Jifeng walked in slowly. What made the students of Classroom 3 feel a little strange was that the teacher had changed from his usual cold and stern demeanor. There was a hint of unconcealable joy in his old eyes. What happened next was even more unexpected to the students. Chao Jifeng looked at the students below the stage and pondered for a moment. Just when the students thought he would put down the heavy book under his armpit and start his routine criticism, he coughed lightly and stretched out his right hand and flicked it in the air a few times. Then he said seriously, "There is a change in the chi of heaven and earth today, so it is not suitable for class. Dismissed." After saying this, Chao Jifeng turned and left the study room without hesitation, leaving behind a room full of shocked and speechless students, and a sudden burst of discussion. "What's going on? What's wrong with the professor? Is the instructor sick? If he's sick, he should ask for sick leave from the academy. Why is he playing this trick? What do you mean by there is a change in the chi of heaven and earth today? The chi of heaven and earth changes all the time. It's not like it just started to change today. Damn, what a cruel trick. Can we use this trick even if we don't want to go to class in the future?" Chu Yuxian lightly bumped Ning Kei's shoulder and said incredulously, "What kind of madness has old Chao suffered from today?" "How would I know?" Ning Kei was also extremely puzzled. But it was better for him not to go to class. He could spend more time in the old library. Looking at the etiquette lesson plan that was just spread out on the table, he thought to himself, "If I had known this would happen, why did I spend so much effort to organize it last night?" He shook his head and began to organize the books, preparing to leave. At this moment, someone in front of the study room said, "Didn't you see the joy on Professor Chao's face just now? That's because an important person is coming to Chang'an City today. The professor is in a hurry to go out of the city to welcome him. That's why he made such a lame excuse." What kind of important person could make old Chao so excited? I remember on the last winter solstice, the minister of the Ministry of Rites came to give consolation money to the instructors. It was 300 taels of silver. The minister, old Chao's face was still as gloomy as if the emperor of Yen Kingdom was dead. It's inevitable for people whose country has fallen to have some resentment. What you said is too unkind. The student in front said with a smile. As for who the important person is today, and why he could make Professor Chao so excited, it actually has something to do with these things. Although Professor Chao is a senior instructor of the academy, don't forget that he is first and foremost a Yen. What do you mean? The important person who is coming to Chang'an City today is Prince Longqing of the Yen Kingdom. How could Professor Chao not be excited? Who would believe that? If he cherishes his country, he would be excited to see the royal family of his country. The Crown Prince of Yen has always been a guest in Chang'an City. Why didn't I see old Chao go to the city to pay his respects every day? Ignorant fool. Chu Yu listened closely to the argument in front of him and whispered sarcastically to Ning Kei, "The Crown Prince of Yen is just a hostage. How could he be compared with Prince Longqing? You know, for the Yen people, after being suppressed by the Tang Empire for hundreds of years, they have long regarded Prince Longqing as the last hope of revival. How could old Chao not be excited when he knew that he was coming?" "Prince Longqing?" Ning Kei asked curiously. "Is he the brother of the Crown Prince of Yen?" "Blood brother." Ning Kei frowned and said, "Then why would the Yen people place the hope of revival on this? Prince Longqing? Even if the Yen Emperor passes away in the future, the Crown Prince of Yen should inherit the throne. This is the problem. As far as I know, most people in the Yen Kingdom do not agree to let the Crown Prince inherit the throne. They think that Prince Longqing should inherit the throne. Many people think that Prince Longqing is a rare genius." Hearing the words "rare genius," Ning Kei's knitted eyebrows relaxed. He tidied up the books and said with a smile, "This is also a genius, that is also a genius. I have been in Chang'an City for less than a year, but I am really tired of hearing these two words. If geniuses are really rare, there might not be too many of them in the Tianqi era. Well, Chu Yuxian looked at him and said jokingly, "You are usually quiet and calm. I thought you did not care about what happened that day, nor did you care about the attitude of your classmates towards you. I did not expect you to still remember it and despise geniuses like Xie Qingyun. But you have to know that Prince Longqing is not Xie Qingyun." Ning Ke stopped what he was doing and looked at him, waiting to hear more. "Prince Longqing is a real genius," Chu Yuxian said seriously. "You are really talking nonsense," Ning Ke said angrily, and then he was slightly stunned by the discussion coming from the front. The four words Prince Longqing caused many exclamations of shock and admiration in the study room, and then a long discussion. Few people like Ning Ke, who had lived in the frontier fortress for a long time, had never heard of this name. However, there were still some people who had the same question as him. What kind of person was Prince Longqing? How could he make the people of Yen place their hopes of reviving their country on him? How could he make Professor Chao Jifeng so excited that he lost his composure? Although he is a prince of the Yen kingdom, after his brother was sent to Chang'an City as a hostage, the royal family of the Yen kingdom sent him to travel around the world to learn. He stayed in the Yueluan kingdom, the Great River Kingdom and the South Jin Kingdom for a few months, and then entered the Revelation Institute of Haotian Taoism in the West Hill Divine Kingdom to study. He became the first in his first year. There was no doubt that the academy in the south of Chang'an was the oldest, most prestigious, and most respected academy in the world. However, other countries also had their own famous academies. The Revelation Institute of the West Hill Divine Kingdom was personally taught by the Divine Hall's divine priests, and was considered the best. It was naturally extraordinary to be able to stand out in such a place. However, this alone could not explain too much. At least, it could not intimidate the proud students in the academy. In the third year after Prince Longqing entered the Revelation Institute, he followed his teacher to preach to various places. That autumn, in the Lank Temple on Hua Mountain, the instructor of the Revelation Institute and the Vedanta of the Buddhism sect debated and retreated. Prince Longqing smiled and stood up, debating with the 7 disciples of the Buddhism sect for 3 days and 3 nights, winning 7 rounds in a row. He even made the eldest disciple of the Lank Temple vomit blood and fall to the ground. In the end, the Lank Temple elder who lived in seclusion rang the bell and spoke. Only then did he smile and shut up, returning to his seat. The Lank Temple elder praised him for his profound knowledge and unparalleled debating skills. If he could enter the Buddhism sect, he would be able to understand the essence of reincarnation in less than 10 years and be guided to an unattainable place. How could the West Hill Divine Palace allow the Buddhism sect to snatch away their favorite disciple? In the 4th year after Prince Longqing entered the Revelation Institute, the hierarch of Haotian Taoism accepted him as a core disciple and even allowed him to start learning how to deal with the affairs of the judicial department of the Divine Hall. Now I heard that Prince Longqing is only 1 step away from entering the knowing destiny state and is highly valued by Haotian Taoism. He is already the 2nd most powerful person in the judicial department, specializing in guarding against the heterodox demons. He has great authority. The 2nd most powerful person in the judicial department of the Divine Hall? A student gasped and said, "Such a bigwig can't do much in the Tang Empire, but if he were in the South Jin Kingdom or the Great River Kingdom, even the Emperor would not dare to disobey him." Then why did he come to the Tang Empire, to Chang'an? Because Prince Longqing wants to enter our academy to study. Enter the academy? Would such a bigwig come to be our classmate? You wish. Such a bigwig has been studying in the Revelation Institute for many years and is now an important figure in the West Hill Divine Palace. How could he be our classmate? Of course, His purpose of entering the academy is to enter the second floor. He came to Chang, and this time not only to enter the second floor to continue his study, but also to replace his brother, the Crown Prince of Yen, as a hostage. The Emperor of Yen is getting older and weaker, and no one knows when he will pass away. His Majesty values filial piety, and agreed to let the Crown Prince of Yen return to Chang and to take care of his parents, but asked the Yen kingdom to replace him with an important member of the royal family. After thinking about it, who else is qualified except for Prince Long Qing? The West Hill Divine Palace has cultivated Prince Long Qing for many years, and it has proven that he is indeed very talented. The Yen kingdom values his talent and his close relationship with the West Hill Divine Palace. They see him as the hope of the Yen kingdom's revival. In their eyes, this prince is much more important than the crown prince who has been a hostage in Chang'an for many years. So what I don't understand is why the Yen kingdom actually agreed to the Tang Empire's request this time. Through the introductions and compliments of the dozen or so students from prestigious families, a clear picture gradually formed in the minds of the academy students. A young member of the royal family, a young cultivator who was about to enter the knowing destiny state, carrying the hope of the Yen kingdom's revival, and an important person to be cultivated by the West Hill Divine Palace. Who else could such a person be but a talent of the mandate of heaven? Thinking of Prince Long Qing's elegance, the young and proud students in the study room could not help but have extremely complicated feelings. Some were envious, some admired, and some were indistinct. But this indistinctness had no power in front of the other party's dazzling history and reputation. For a moment, the study room became strangely quiet. Chu Yuxian looked at his classmates and added with a smile, "You have forgotten the most famous thing about Prince Long Qing. You should know that this prince is extremely handsome, and some even describe him as beautiful. In addition, he is well educated and has a magnificent temperament. When he first entered the Yueluan kingdom in his youth, he attracted the attention of countless young girls in the Yueluan kingdom. It is said that on that day, many pairs of embroidered shoes were trampled, and many girls' voices were broken by his cries, and many pairs of eyes were red from crying. This was a very famous anecdote. Of course, the students in the study room knew about it. But most of the young men who spoke with confidence and composure were willing to mention this part. Now that Chu Yuxian said this, the young girls sitting in the front row of the study room suddenly thought of this rumor. Their youthful faces suddenly lit up. Even Miss Gao, who had been a little depressed recently, opened her eyes wide and unconsciously raised the corner of her mouth slightly. "I say, sisters, it is too late for you to be infatuated now." Chu Yuxian was best at stabbing once and then stabbing again. He looked at the girls with a sneaky smile and said, "Prince Long Qing has long been engaged to Princess Lu Qinjia of the Yueluan kingdom. She is also the most famous infatuated girl in the world. Back when Prince Long Qing was studying Buddhism in the Yueluan kingdom, he fell in love with Princess Lu Qinjia at first sight. Later on, this princess traveled thousands of miles to the Revelation Institute to study, just to spend time with Prince Long Qing. How would you have the chance? Everyone knows that Lu Qinjia is infatuated with flowers. You are no match for her at all." When the girls in the study room heard this, their expressions became somewhat awkward. But could they still argue with Chu Yuxian's words? They could only purse their lips and lower their heads in grievance. When Sidu Ilan saw the expressions of her female companions, she could not help but frown and talk about other topics, diluting the lovesickness in the study room. Lu Qinjia, the flower addict of the Yueluan kingdom, was a famous beauty in the world. Other than that, there were two other girls in the world who were compared to her. One of them was the last female disciple of the great calligrapher of the Great River Kingdom. It was said that she was extremely gentle and virtuous. She loved calligraphy, so she was called the calligraphy addict. The other was a mysterious female disciple of the Revelation Institute of West Hill. It was said that she was extremely gentle and beautiful, but her heart was focused on Taoism. Other than cultivation, she had no other thoughts. She was called the Tao Addict. Speaking of which, both the flower addict and the calligraphy addict know her name. It is just that the Tao Addict has always been extremely mysterious. The world only knows that there is such a beauty in the West Hill Divine Kingdom, but they do not know her name or where she is now. Sidhu Ilan listened to the curious discussion of her classmate. After a moment of hesitation, she said, "Indeed, not many people know the name of the Tao Addict. But I heard that she is now the #1 figure in the judicial department of the Divine Hall. I'm alive again. Turns out that adjusting for jet lag is also very painful. Getting up at 6 o'clock is not something a human should do. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.